Smoked neck bones sat in a foil pan at the end of the table, and nobody walked past without pulling one. That was a Saturday cookout in 1964, somewhere between Memphis and Mobile. Fried corn rolled in bacon grease, watermelon rind pickles in a mason jar, peach cobbler baked in a Dutch oven set right on the coals. One dish on this list used a cut so cheap the butcher practically gave it away. Another vanished the moment the old neighborhood got torn down. And one was something every grandmother on the block made, but no two ever made it the same way. Every dish on that table told you exactly who cooked it and where they came from. Hit subscribe so you catch every list we put out. 100 forgotten cookout dishes Black families made in the 1960s.
Peach and cornbread pudding was a layered dessert that brought together juicy fresh peaches and moist, crumbly cornbread soaked in a sweet custard. This dish capitalized on the abundance of peaches during harvest season and the staple nature of cornbread in Southern kitchens. Home cooks layered slices of cornbread with peeled, sliced peaches before pouring a creamy mixture of eggs, milk, and sugar over the top. The pudding was then baked until golden and set, producing a warm, comforting dessert that balanced fruity sweetness with a buttery texture. This recipe represented a resourceful use of pantry staples and seasonal fruits, turning simple ingredients into a memorable treat. It was often served at family dinners and church socials, embodying both hospitality and tradition. The combination of fruit and cornbread made it a unique contribution to African American culinary heritage, showcasing creativity in desserts. Today, it remains a nostalgic favorite that connects modern palates to classic Southern flavors.
Number 14, barbecued goat, a whole goat or a half, slow cooked over wood in a pit dug into the ground. Common in East Texas, along the Gulf Coast, in parts of the Carolinas, and at family reunions across the rural Deep South. The tradition ran straight through the Caribbean and back to West Africa. Goat meat was lean and tough if you rushed the cooking, and you could not rush it. It needed all night over low coals, basted with nothing more than salt, pepper, and cider vinegar. The flavor was sharper than pork, wilder than beef, and there was nothing else on the cookout table that tasted anything like it. Goat was cheap because it was easy to raise. It grazed on scrub land that would not support a cow. A family could keep 2 or 3 animals in the yard without owning pasture land. The cookout that served a whole goat was a serious event, the kind of gathering where somebody stayed up all night watching the fire and the guests arrived, knowing that what they were about to eat could not be bought at any store. By the late 1980s, goat started leaving the table for the same reasons that pushed most of this list out of the yard. The generation that knew how to slaughter, dress, and pit roast a whole animal was aging out. The grocery store did not stock goat. The skills required to handle a carcass that size were not being taught to children who had moved to the city. Today, goat costs more per pound than pork in most American cities, and the families that once roasted it in an earthen pit live in places where digging that pit is no longer an option. Number 18, creamed corn. Creamed corn was never something from a can. Fresh ears of Silver Queen or Trucker's Favorite were scored down each row with a sharp knife, then scraped hard with the back of the blade until the milky pulp and starch separated from the cob. That thick, sweet mash went into a cast iron skillet with butter, salt, pepper, and just enough whole milk to loosen it into a slow simmer. No flour, no cream. The corn did the thickening on its own. July was the only month this dish existed because that was when the corn came in from the garden or the roadside stand. Families who grew their own picked it the morning of the cookout and shucked it on the back porch with a paper bag between the knees to catch the silk. The difference between fresh scraped cream corn and the canned version sharing the same name was the difference between a kitchen that grew food and a kitchen that bought it. When backyard gardens shrank and farm stands gave way to supermarkets, the skill of scraping corn off the cob left with the generation that learned it from watching, not from reading. Number 15, pickled pig feet plate. A quart jar of pig feet sat on the counter of almost every Green Book cafe south of the Mason-Dixon line. The feet were split, boiled until tender, then packed into brine with vinegar, bay leaves, peppercorns, and red pepper flakes. Some cooks added cloves. The jar stayed at room temperature behind the register. A customer pointed, the cook fished one out with tongs, set it on a plate with saltine crackers and hot sauce, and that was the meal. No cooking required once the jar was filled. The pickled pig foot was the original ready-to-eat protein a century before the convenience store wrap sandwich. Pig feet are still sold in jars at some grocery stores today, but the practice of eating one off a cafe counter, standing up, cracker in one hand, has been extinct for decades. Number 17, fried chicken wings with hot sauce. Long before Buffalo had a claim on the wing, black speakeasies across the South and the Great Migration cities were serving fried chicken wings as drinking food. Wings were the part of the bird the butcher could not sell to anyone who had a choice. In speakeasy kitchens, they got seasoned, fried hard, and tossed in a vinegar-based hot sauce that stained the fingers and made the next drink come faster. A bucket of wings sat on the bar, and people grabbed one without stopping the conversation. There was no plate, no napkin, no ceremony. When Prohibition ended and the speakeasy kitchens closed, the wing disappeared from bar food for nearly 50 years. It resurfaced in 1964 in Buffalo, New York, stripped of its black speakeasy roots entirely. Number 17, spaghetti with ground beef. Stretch 1 pound of ground chuck across 5 hungry mouths, and you have the math problem every working black mother solved every Thursday night in 1986. Half a pound of meat, browned in a heavy pot with chopped yellow onion and green bell pepper. The grease drained off into an empty coffee can on the back of the stove. Then a can of generic store-brand tomato sauce, a can of stewed tomatoes, a teaspoon of sugar to cut the acid, garlic powder, dried oregano if you had it on the spice rack, salt and pepper to taste. The sauce simmered low for 30 minutes while the cheap, thin spaghetti noodles boiled in a separate pot of salted water. A working mother of 3 in Cleveland could put this plate on the table in under 25 minutes flat after walking in from her second shift. With a slice of buttered white bread and a tall glass of red Kool-Aid, the whole supper came in under $3. Spaghetti night fed the family of 5 for under $3, exactly as your grandmother always promised it would. Number 20, red rice purlieu. The Low Country Gullah congregations brought a deep red rice purlieu to fellowship halls from Charleston up through coastal North Carolina well into 1968. The church matrons rendered diced country bacon in a wide cast aluminum pan, dropped in chopped onion and green pepper, stirred in a can of stewed tomatoes, then poured in a full pound of long grain rice and twice its volume in broth. It cooked covered on the back of the church stove until every grain was stained the color of a brick wall. Served from a deep enamel platter, it filled half a paper plate and any room around it. After the Great Migration thinned the older low country families, the home version of purlieu lost its place. Number 16, neck bone and rice. This was Tuesday night supper in most black households across the South, but at a reunion, it was made in a pot the size of a wash tub. Pork neck bones, browned in lard, then simmered with onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and enough water to make a thick, dark gravy that soaked into the rice and turned every grain brown. The meat fell off the bone in shreds. A plate cost about 11 cents in 1972. A woman in Meridian, Mississippi made it every reunion from 1965 to 1983. She bought the neck bones from a butcher who saved them for her because nobody else wanted them. That was the whole economy of soul food. You ate what nobody else wanted, and you made it taste like love. By the 1990s, neck bones were no longer the cheapest cut. Food television discovered braised meats, prices went up, and the dish that fed a reunion for under $5 started costing $15. The math stopped working. Number 2, hot dog with chili and slaw on Wonder Bread. There was no bun. The bun was a slice of Wonder Bread folded in half like a small white envelope. The dog was an Oscar Mayer or a soubrette, sliced lengthwise, set on the half barrel. The chili was a pot your auntie had simmered. Friday night, ground beef, kidney beans, chili powder, a tin of tomato paste, a pinch of sugar. The slaw was raw cabbage chopped fine, a tablespoon of mayonnaise, a tablespoon of yellow mustard, a pinch of celery seed. The dog landed on the bread, the chili on top, the slaw on top of the chili, the bread folded around it. A child ate it with 2 hands, the grease ran down the wrist. A second slice of Wonder Bread caught what fell. By 1995, the corner store had stopped carrying the slaw cabbage by the head, and the dog on the curb had become a foil-wrapped item from a halal cart. Neck bones and rice was weeknight supper, stretching a few cents worth of bones into a meal feeding the whole family. Butchers practically gave away neck bones, considering them worthless scraps. Black families knew better, recognizing rich flavor hiding in those bony cuts. The bones were browned until caramelized, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until meat fell away tender. The broth turned silky from rendered collagen, creating natural gravy without flour. Served over rice, the dish provided protein, starch, and deep satisfaction. Children learned to work around bones, finding every scrap and savoring marrow within. Neck bones and rice taught that value existed where others saw none, that patience revealed treasures in humble ingredients. The dish fed families through lean times.
Black radish slaw was a sharp, peppery side dish that packed a flavorful punch. The black-skinned radishes, larger and spicier than the red variety, were peeled and shredded into thin strands. Tossed with vinegar, salt, and sometimes a pinch of sugar, the radish softened slightly while still keeping its crisp bite. The dressing's acidity helped mellow the heat while bringing out the radish's earthy undertones. This slaw was often served with fried fish, smoked meats, or hearty stews, where its bold flavor cut through richness. It was a wintertime favorite since black radishes stored well in root cellars, offering fresh crunch when other produce was scarce. For those who liked a stronger kick, the slaw could be left to marinate longer, intensifying its flavor. Black radish slaw was not a dish for timid palates, but for those who appreciated its bite, it was unforgettable. This was no frozen grocery store pie. Venison pot pie came from hunters and homesteaders, made with fresh-shot deer meat that had been stewed for hours over low heat. It was mixed with carrots, potatoes, or wild onions if you had them, and poured into a rough pie crust made from flour and lard. The crust was thick, never flaky, and it needed to be. It had to hold up against days-old stew and keep well without a refrigerator. The pie would bake in a heavy Dutch oven, often buried in coals, while the smell filled the entire cabin. It was a special dinner, usually reserved for after a good hunt or around holidays when families gathered. You could slice it like cake and serve it warm or cold. It tasted like salt, smoke, and hard-earned luck. If you had enough venison to make 2, you stored 1 under a towel for the next day. No one ever said no to a second helping.
Number 20, hog head, cheese, sliced cold on a platter. The whole head was boiled for hours with onion, vinegar, and bay leaves until every scrap of meat fell off the bone and the liquid turned to gelatin. The meat was picked clean, seasoned with cayenne and black pepper, packed into a loaf pan, and set in the icebox overnight. By morning, it had firmed into a solid block that sliced clean and held together on a plate. At the cookout, the loaf sat on the side table next to the pickles and the white bread. People cut their own slices. The texture was firm and cool, with pockets of soft meat suspended in clear jelly, and the vinegar kept it sharp enough to cut through the richness of everything else on the plate. Head cheese disappeared when the younger generation decided they did not want to know what was in it. The name alone stopped people from trying it, and the butcher stopped carrying whole heads because nobody under 40 asked for one. A cookout in the 1970s was a 12-hour commitment. Somebody dug a pit or lit a fire before dawn. Somebody else started the sides by mid-morning. The table filled slowly through the day, dish by dish, as people arrived carrying covered bowls they had been cooking since the night before. By the 1990s, the cookout had become a 2-hour event. A gas grill, store-bought buns, pre-formed patties, a tub of store-made potato salad. What disappeared was not just food, it was time. Every dish on this list demanded time that stopped existing. Time to source the cuts, time to stand over a hot pot or tend a pit for hours. When the time left, the food left with it. Number 19, smoked rabbit. Somebody brought it from the hunt, cleaned and quartered, lean and gamey, and the grill was not kind to it because it dried out fast if you looked away. Had to be basted with vinegar and fat the entire time it sat over the coals. Some people wrapped it in strips of bacon or fatback to hold the moisture in. Rabbit showed up at cookouts in the rural South where hunting was still a weekly household activity, not a weekend hobby. It left the table when hunting left the routine, when the generation that had grown up trapping and shooting for the family table moved to cities where the skill had no use. Number 29, smoked turkey legs. A whole turkey leg, brined overnight in salt water and sugar, smoked low over hickory until the skin turned dark mahogany and the meat pulled clean from the bone. Turkey legs were pit food. They went on the smoker alongside the ribs in the early hours and came off just before the table was set. Men standing around the fire ate them first, one hand on the bone, the other holding a napkin that was never enough. The leg was big enough to be a meal by itself and cheap enough to smoke a dozen for the whole yard. By the late 1980s, smoked turkey legs showed up mostly at county fairs, sold at prices that would have bought the whole bird a generation earlier. The backyard version, seasoned by the family and smoked before dawn, cost almost nothing and tasted like it meant something. Number 8, blackberry cobbler. Not a bakery cobbler with lattice crust and measured sugar. Green Book Cafe cobbler was wild blackberries picked that morning, dumped into a baking pan with sugar and a squeeze of lemon, topped with a batter of flour, butter, sugar, and milk, and baked until the fruit bubbled up through the crust and stained it purple. The proportions changed every time depending on how many berries the cook had gathered. Some versions were more crust than berry. Some were more berry than crust. Both were correct. Cobbler was served warm, with nothing on top or with a scoop of vanilla ice cream if the cafe owned a freezer. The version made from wild berries, measured by eye, baked without a written recipe, is gone. Commercial cobbler uses cultivated fruit and printed instructions. It tastes clean where the old version tasted wild. Number 12, crawfish stew. Crawfish were free in rural Louisiana. They came out of the ditch behind the building after a heavy rain. The stew was built on a dark roux, thickened with flour and fat, loaded with crawfish tails, onion, celery, and green pepper, and ladled over rice. It was Cajun in technique and Black in tradition, served in a room where the music was loud and the whiskey was clear. A pot of crawfish stew could feed a speakeasy for an entire evening off ingredients that cost next to nothing. After repeal, legal Cajun restaurants claimed the crawfish tradition as their own. The black speakeasy version, rougher and built on ditch-caught crawfish, had no seat at the new table. Number 8, sweet potato pie. The bag of sweet potatoes from the produce aisle cost under $1 in 1986, and one 5-pound sack baked off 2 whole pies for the Sunday supper table. The potatoes roasted in the oven for an hour until the skins blistered and the flesh inside turned to soft orange custard with a sweet smell that carried into the living room. The peels slid off in your fingers. The pulp went into a mixing bowl with brown sugar, evaporated milk, 2 eggs, a heavy shake of cinnamon and nutmeg, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a pat of melted butter. Whipped smooth with a hand mixer, the filling poured into a frozen pie shell from the freezer case. 45 minutes in a moderate oven set the custard and browned the top. A pie cost under $2 to make and served 8 at the church fellowship hall. Sweet potato pie was the dessert that ended every Sunday supper. Number 23, salmon croquette loaf. By 1966, a flat tin can of pink salmon cost about 45 cents at the country grocery, and that one can feed a whole pew of children at the fellowship hall. The church ladies mashed the pink salmon with its soft bones and skin still in, mixed in finely chopped sweet onion, 2 beaten eggs, a sleeve of crushed saltine crumbs, and yellow cornmeal. They patted the whole thing into a single shallow loaf pan and baked it at 375 degrees instead of frying 20 separate patties one by one. Cut into squares, drizzled with a thin flour and milk pan gravy, it stretched a single can across 30 paper plates. The leftover pieces went home in tin foil for Monday school lunches. After the price of canned salmon doubled in the late 1970s, the loaf disappeared and only the pricier pan-fried croquettes survived. Number 22, crackling bread. This was cornbread with a secret. After a hog killing, the skin was rendered in a cast iron pot until the fat melted away and the skin crisped into golden, crunchy pieces called cracklings. You folded those cracklings into cornbread batter and baked it in a hot skillet greased with lard. Crispy on the outside, dense on the inside, with pockets of salty pork fat that melted on your tongue. In the 1950s, you could buy cracklings at any country store in Mississippi or Georgia for a few cents a bag. A woman in Yazoo City made crackling bread for every reunion from 1958 to 1981. She brought it wrapped in a flour sack towel inside a paper bag. By the mid-1980s, hog killings had all but stopped. Families moved to cities, supermarkets replaced the smokehouse, and without fresh cracklings, the bread was just cornbread. It was good, but it was not the same. Number 15, Faygo Rock and Rye, RC Cola, Tropical Fantasy, and Welch's Grape. The soda was free for the kids and the elders both. The soda was a regional code. In Detroit, it was Faygo Rock and Rye in the red can, vanilla and cherry, the bottle your cousins fought over. In Brooklyn, it was Tropical Fantasy in the wax-coated bottle, 25 cents at the bodega, 20 cans for $5 at the cash and carry. In Newark and the Bronx, it was Welch's Grape Soda, purple lips on every child by 4 o'clock. RC Cola filled in everywhere else. The host paid for none of it because the numbers runner walked the block on Friday afternoon, took the host's hand, and said, "The sodas are on me." That is how a block party in 1976 got its sweetness paid for. Now, the numbers runner is a memory. The sodas are still on the shelf. The economy that put them in a kid's hand for free is gone. Smothered cabbage transformed a humble vegetable into something rich through slow cooking with pork fat. The cabbage was shredded and added to a pot with rendered bacon drippings, onions, and a splash of vinegar for brightness. Covered tightly, it cooked low and slow until leaves turned silky and absorbed smoky pork flavor completely. Some families added ham or bacon for extra richness, while others relied solely on drippings. The finished dish was tender and savory, nothing like the crisp vegetable it started as. Cabbage was cheap and stored well through winter, making this a reliable meal when other vegetables were scarce. Children who claimed to hate cabbage ate this version without complaint, won over by richness and depth. Smothered cabbage proved technique mattered more than expensive ingredients.
Baked celery root mash was a rustic yet refined side that made use of an earthy, knobby vegetable that many overlooked. Celery root, or celeriac, was peeled, cubed, and boiled until soft, then mashed with butter, cream, and herbs for flavor. The mash was spread in a baking dish and baked until lightly golden on top, giving it a subtle crust while keeping the inside smooth and rich. Its flavor was milder than celery, but carried the same fresh, slightly herbal note, making it a perfect match for roasted meats or poultry. This dish was popular in the colder months when celery root was in season and stored well, offering variety to the winter table. Baked celery root mash was a way to turn a humble ingredient into something worthy of a special meal, all while keeping its preparation simple and honest.
Number 21, sweet potato pone. This was not sweet potato pie and not sweet potato casserole. Sweet potato pone was older than both. The recipe appeared in handwritten church cookbooks from the 1880s across Georgia, Alabama, and the Mississippi Delta. Raw sweet potatoes were grated by hand on a box grater, mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and spices, then baked slow until the top cracked and the center set dense and dark, almost like a pudding. It took close to 2 hours in a wood-fired oven. The texture was heavy, somewhere between cornbread and fudge, and it was eaten warm with nothing on top. Grating enough sweet potato for a family of 8 meant raw knuckles and sore arms. When canned sweet potatoes and pre-made pie crust showed up in stores in the 1950s, sweet potato pone was one of the first recipes to drop out of the rotation. Nobody noticed until the hands that grated them were gone.
Turkey neck soup was a nourishing broth-based soup made using flavorful turkey necks simmered with root vegetables and herbs to create a rich, hearty meal. This soup made use of often overlooked parts of the turkey, reflecting a tradition of resourcefulness and respect for the whole animal. The necks were slowly cooked until tender, releasing deep flavors into the broth that was both warming and sustaining. Root vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes added body and nutrition, making the soup a filling choice especially in colder months. Popular in African American households, this recipe symbolized thriftiness and culinary skill, turning inexpensive cuts into delicious meals. The soup was commonly served with cornbread or rice and was a staple at family tables during gatherings and everyday dinners alike. Its enduring popularity speaks to a legacy of making the most of what was available while creating comforting, flavorful food.
Number 11, pigtail sandwiches, smoked low or braised in a pot with vinegar and pepper, then piled onto white bread with hot sauce. There was almost no meat on a pigtail, mostly fat, cartilage, and skin wrapped around small vertebrae. You gnawed your way through one, working the bone clean, and tossed the scraps into the grass. The flavor was rich and porky and concentrated in a way that leaner cuts could not match. Pigtails disappeared from the cookout when families stopped buying parts of the whole animal at the butcher and started picking pre-wrapped individual cuts from a grocery store cooler. A sealed rack of ribs replaced a paper-wrapped bucket of tails, and the tails never came back. Number 10, grilled venison steaks from a fall deer hunt. In the rural South, deer season was not sport. It was a calendar event that filled the freezer for months. Backstrap and round steaks, cut thick, soaked overnight in Worcestershire, garlic and black pepper, and grilled hot and fast. Cooked past medium, and the meat turned to shoe leather. Cooked right, and it was tender, clean, and deeper than any beef at the table. Venison appeared at late season cookouts in November and December, still cold from the ice chest in the bed of the truck. The hunter who brought it carved the steaks himself and stood by the grill to make sure nobody overcooked them. The venison left the same way the rabbit and the quail did. The hunters got older, the land they walked got fenced off or sold, and the freezer that used to hold a season of deer meat started holding bags from the grocery store instead. Number 9, smoked turkey necks. On a smoker for hours, low and slow, until the collagen broke down and the dark meat clung to the vertebrae in rich, shredded strands. You pulled it off with your teeth and your fingers and wiped your hands on your shirt because the napkin was already gone. Turkey necks were never the center of the cookout. They sat on a foil tray near the pit, and people walked over and picked at them between rounds of the real meal. Nobody made a plate of turkey necks. You just grabbed one when you passed by. They faded when the deep-fried whole turkey arrived and replaced every other method of cooking poultry outdoors. The spectacle of dropping a whole bird into hot oil made the slow-smoked neck feel small. Number 24, smothered chicken. Smothered chicken took up the entire stove. A whole bird cut into pieces, seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, browned hard in a cast iron skillet, then buried under a thick onion gravy made from the drippings. The lid went on. The heat dropped low. The kitchen filled with the smell that pulled people in from the yard. After more than an hour, the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork, and the gravy soaked into whatever it touched. At a 4th of July spread, smothered chicken was for people who did not eat pork. It never felt like a second choice. By the 1990s, boneless, skinless breasts replaced the whole bird in most homes. The gravy was the first thing to go. Number 18, liver pudding on white bread. Not liverwurst, not pate. Liver pudding was a Carolina specialty made by grinding cooked pork liver with cornmeal, sage, black pepper, and a pinch of red pepper flake, then pressing the mixture into a loaf and slicing it cold. Green Book cafes in the Piedmont region served it on soft white bread, sometimes with a smear of mayonnaise, sometimes plain. It was a working man's lunch, quick, filling, and dense enough to last until supper. The loaf sat in the icebox for a week. Without spoiling, one loaf made 20 sandwiches. Liver pudding still exists in small meat markets across eastern North Carolina today, but as a cafe dish served on a plate alongside a scoop of slaw, it vanished with the cafes that once listed it on their chalkboards. Number 29, hot tamales from the barrel. Along the gravel roads of the Mississippi Delta, a woman with a push cart or a steaming barrel outside a juke joint door sold tamales wrapped in corn husks for pennies. The filling was pork shoulder or whatever the butcher let go that day, spiced with cayenne and black pepper, steamed until the husk darkened. These were not Mexican tamales, and nobody called them that. They were Delta tamales, smaller, spicier, and tied to the juke joint the way peanuts belong to a ballpark. After Prohibition, the juke joints that survived went legal, and the ones that did not took the tamale barrel with them. By the 1940s, the Delta tamale was a memory on a gravel road. Before going any further, for those who want the recipes and kitchen traditions from these videos gathered in one place, they have been put together in a book called Big Mama's Soul Food Kitchen, available at our website, thehungryhistorian.com. That is the only mention. If it interests you, it is there. Now back to the list. Number 22, sausage gravy over biscuits. Inside every Black household kitchen in the South Carolina Low Country sat a tube of cheap breakfast sausage and a sleeve of canned biscuits from the dollar store cooler. The sausage went into a hot, heavy skillet first, broken up with the back of a wooden spoon, browned until the edges caught and the fat ran clear. 3 heaping spoons of flour were stirred into the drippings to make a quick roux. Then evaporated milk and water were added slow, whisked steady until the gravy thickened into a slow pouring river. The Pillsbury biscuits popped open from the can with a satisfying smack, baked off in 10 minutes, split with a knife while still steaming. Gravy ladled over the open biscuit until it ran off the plate onto the napkin. This breakfast carried black grandfathers to the steel mill at 5 in the morning and church mothers to choir rehearsal at 6 in the evening. The whole pan cost under $2 in 1986 and fed 4 hungry working people. Sausage gravy was Southern luxury at Southern black prices. Number 21, hog's head cheese. Not actually cheese, not even close. By 1965, the church fathers in Black Belt counties from Alabama to South Carolina were still making head cheese in the same back of the kitchen way their grandfathers had. A whole cleaned hog head went into a vinegar water bath with bay leaf, allspice, and a fistful of black pepper and simmered for the better part of Saturday. The cooked meat was picked clean of bone, chopped, seasoned heavily, and poured back into its own broth in a loaf pan to set overnight. By Sunday, it was sliceable, tangy, peppery, and translucent at the edges. It came to the potluck as half-inch slabs on a glass plate next to the saltines. By 1985, a new generation refused to look at it. Number 9, whole hog pit barbecue. This was not grilling. This was a ritual. The men dug a pit 3 feet deep and 6 feet long. They burned hardwood down to coals, lowered in a whole hog on a wire grate, and tended the fire for 12 to 14 hours through the night. They drank coffee, they told stories, they argued about vinegar sauce versus mustard sauce, and by morning, the hog was done. The meat was pulled by hand and brought to the table still steaming. A family in Edgefield, South Carolina, did this every reunion from 1951 to 1986. The pit was in the same spot every year. You could see the old burn marks in the ground. 3 generations of men stayed up all night to tend that fire. The cost was the hog itself, about $40 in 1975. It fed 100 people, but the Great Migration had already begun pulling people away from the land. Sons and grandsons moved to Philadelphia and Newark and Detroit. City codes did not allow open pits. Apartment balconies didn't have room for a 6-foot trench. And the knowledge of how to tend a whole hog through the night, how to read the smoke, how to know when the shoulder was done by the way the bone moved, that wasn't knowledge you could learn from a book. It lived in the hands of men who stood by a fire at 2 in the morning because their fathers had stood there before them. By the 1990s, those men were gone. Their sons came home for the reunion, but brought store-bought barbecue in aluminum trays. The pit stayed empty, and something in the air was missing. It wasn't just the smoke, it was the gathering. It was the reason to stay up all night, the excuse to stand around a fire and say things you wouldn't say in a living room. The pit was the one place where uncles who hadn't spoken in a year would stand shoulder to shoulder and agree on at least one thing, that the shoulder needed another hour. When the pit went cold, those conversations went with it. And that is the thing about reunion food that people forget. It was never just about the eating. It was about what you did to make it. The work was the reunion. The food was the proof it happened. Number 23, yellow rice with peas. On the border blocks where Bed-Stuy met East New York, the Puerto Rican families lived 3 doors down from the black families. Somebody always brought arroz con gandules. The rice was the color of a school bus, like a crayon nobody had used yet. Achiote oil in a jar on the shelf. pigeon peas from a can with a label your mother could not read, a piece of pork shoulder cubed and seared in the bottom of the pot before the rice went in. The whole thing came down in a Reynolds tray. The auntie who carried it had a towel folded under one corner because the bottom was hot. Black kids ate it next to the curry goat. Puerto Rican kids ate it next to the collards. Nobody asked whose food was whose. By the late 1980s, the families were spread across 3 boroughs, and the trays did not meet on the same block again. Number 22, smothered chicken backs in a foil hotel pan. Chicken backs were the part the butcher could not sell on Friday. They went home in a brown bag for 30 cents a pound. Saturday morning, they got dredged in flour, browned in lard, smothered in onion gravy. Your grandmother layered them into a foil tray with the gravy poured over. The tray sat on the radio in the living room while she got dressed. Down on the curb, the tray went on a folding table next to the rice. A serving spoon stood up in the gravy, like a steak in soft ground. A child carrying a paper plate held it with 2 hands because the gravy was still hot. The backs were almost all bone. The reward was the gravy on the rice. The thing is, the backs were never the point. The gravy was the point. By 1985, the butcher who sold the backs had closed. Sorghum and biscuits brought sweetness to tables where refined sugar was a luxury few could afford. Sorghum syrup was made from tall cane-like stalks, pressed and boiled into thick amber syrup with flavor deeper than molasses. Black families drizzled it over hot buttermilk biscuits, the syrup pooling in golden puddles, soaking into tender crumb. Children considered this a treat, while adults valued how natural sugars provided quick energy for field work. Some families grew their own sorghum, taking stalks to community mills. Others purchased it from neighbors at prices lower than store-bought sweeteners. Sorghum with biscuits became breakfast and dessert, sometimes both. The syrup kept well through winter when fresh fruits were unavailable. This simple pairing proved satisfaction did not require wealth.
Cucumber and onion salad was a light and refreshing dish that often appeared during the hottest days of summer, when the air was heavy and appetites leaned toward something cool. Thinly sliced cucumbers and onions were layered together and soaked in a vinegar brine, sometimes sweetened with a little sugar to balance the tang. The vinegar gave the vegetables a crisp bite, while the onions added a sharp note that contrasted the cool cucumber. Some cooks like to add dill or parsley for an herbal touch, while others kept it simple, letting the fresh produce speak for itself. The salad was served chilled, making it a perfect side for fried chicken, barbecue ribs, or fish. It was easy to prepare in large batches, meaning it could feed a crowd at picnics or reunions without much effort. For many, the taste was tied to garden harvests and backyard gatherings, offering a bright counterpoint to heavier dishes. Even after hours in the fridge, it stayed crisp and tangy, holding on to its refreshing quality from the first bite to the last spoonful. It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest recipes had the longest-lasting appeal. Mashed parsnips were a sweet, creamy alternative to mashed potatoes, especially in the colder months when root vegetables were plentiful and warming dishes were most welcome. The parsnips were peeled, boiled until tender, and then mashed with butter, cream, and seasoning to create a smooth texture. Their flavor was mild yet distinct, with a natural sweetness that deepened during cooking, offering something different from the familiar taste of potatoes. This dish often accompanied roasted meats, adding a velvety side to the plate that balanced out savory flavors. Some families added a pinch of nutmeg or cinnamon for warmth, while others preferred a simple seasoning of salt and pepper. Parsnips were inexpensive and stored well through the winter, making them a practical choice for frugal households. They could be served on their own or mixed with potatoes for a blended mash that offered the best of both. Mashed parsnips carried a home-style charm, the kind of side that felt just as right on a holiday table as it did on a regular weeknight dinner. They were proof that comfort food did not need to be complicated to be memorable.
Number 2, cane syrup cake. Cane syrup poured heavy into a batter of flour, eggs, butter, and warm spices, then baked into a dense, dark cake that smelled like the sugar mill itself. Big Mama baked cane syrup cake when white sugar was too dear and molasses was too bitter for company. The syrup gave the cake a rounded sweetness with a caramel depth that granulated sugar could never reach. Every slice was moist enough to eat without frosting, and it kept for days wrapped in a cloth on the counter. Cane syrup cake belonged to families who lived close enough to a sugar mill to buy the syrup by the gallon. When the small mills closed, the syrup became a specialty item, and the cake that had once been the cheapest dessert in the kitchen became something only people with long memories still baked. Number 5, sweet potato pone carried out from the kitchen. Grated raw sweet potato mixed with molasses, butter, cinnamon, and a little flour poured into a greased pan and baked low and slow until the top cracked and darkened and the inside turned dense and almost candy sweet. It was not a pie and not a cake. It was something older than both, heavy enough to hold in your hand and rich enough that a small square was plenty. At the cookout, the pone sat on the dessert table, still in the pan it was baked in, cut into squares, already half gone by the time the meat came off the grill. Children ate it like candy. Adults ate it like a memory. Sweet potato pone faded when the recipe stopped being passed along. It required grating by hand, long baking, and a feel for molasses that could not be measured with a cup. Younger cooks replaced it with sweet potato pie from a store, which was faster and easier and tasted like something else entirely. Number 22, spoon bread. Spoon bread was closer to a souffle than to cornbread. Coarse ground cornmeal cooked in boiling milk until thick, then beaten with eggs, butter, and salt until the batter turned smooth and airy. It went into a greased dish and into the oven until the top rose, golden, and the center held a custard-like tremble. It came out with a spoon, not a knife. At a cookout, spoon bread absorbed the juices from the meat and the pot liquor from the greens with a refinement cornbread never had. The dish had roots older than the Republic. Enslaved cooks in Virginia and the Carolinas adapted indigenous corn preparations into what became spoon bread. Black grandmothers kept it alive through memory, not cookbooks. By the 1990s, it had nearly disappeared. Too much time, too careful a hand, and too hot an oven in July for a dish most younger guests could not even name. Cornbread took its place because cornbread asked for nothing. Number 17, Souse meat plate. Souse separated a real Green Book cafe from a place pretending to be one. Made from a whole hog's head, cleaned and boiled until the meat slid off the skull, then chopped fine with onion, vinegar, and hot pepper, packed into a loaf pan and chilled overnight. The gelatin from the bones held it firm. The cook sliced it cold and laid 2 slices on a plate with salt and crackers, mustard, and a pickle. No stove work at service time, no last-minute assembly. Souse sat ready in the icebox for a week. For a cafe run by one woman with no help, that mattered more than flavor. The taste was sharp, vinegary, and deeply porky. Travelers either ordered it by name or pushed the plate back at first sight. Souse meat left public dining entirely by the 1980s. Modern meat processors no longer sell whole hog heads to retail customers. The ingredient vanished before the recipe did. Number 25, red beans with ham bone. Red beans and rice was already a Monday tradition in New Orleans, but in the black speakeasies of Treme and the 7th Ward, it served a different purpose. A pot of red beans, simmering on a stove in the back of a bar room, stretched one ham bone into food for 40 people on a Saturday night. The beans were thick enough to stand a spoon in and seasoned with bay leaf, time, and whatever end of a sausage somebody brought through the door. After Prohibition, the legal bars in New Orleans served drinks without food. The communal pot of red beans that fed a speakeasy crowd had no table to sit on anymore. Number 14, Sunday smothered chicken over rice. Some Sundays in our 1980s, kitchens smelled exactly like this dish from the moment your feet hit the kitchen linoleum. The whole fryer chicken cost $2.90 at the A&P in 1985, cut into 8 pieces by the butcher behind the counter who knew your grandmother by her first name. Each piece was patted dry with a paper towel, dusted in seasoned flour, heavy with paprika and black pepper, and dropped one at a time into a Dutch oven with a 1/4 inch of hot vegetable oil. The skin hissed and bubbled and turned the color of an October leaf. The smell that came off that pan was the smell of safety, the smell that told you Sunday dinner was real and the week was finally over. The browned pieces came out onto a plate. Half the oil was poured off. The remaining grease was loosened with 3 heaping spoons of flour, stirred into a roux the color of peanut butter. 2 cups of chicken broth went in slow, whisked until smooth, then a sliced yellow onion, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a pinch of thyme. The chicken pieces returned to the gravy. The lid went on. The whole pot simmered for 40 minutes on a low flame while the rice cooked in a separate pan and the greens finished on the back eye. The kitchen filled with steam that fogged up the window over the sink, the same window your grandmother had been looking out of for 30 years. A scoop of rice went onto the plate first. A piece of dark meat went on top. Gravy ladled over the rice until it pooled at the edge of the plate. A slice of hot water cornbread off to the side. The smell of paprika and onion and chicken fat hung in the kitchen until Monday morning. Sunday smothered chicken was the meal that proved a hard week ended in a soft place. The plate cost under $4 and tasted like a memory you could chew. Number 17, smothered neck bones. Neck bones cost about 35 cents a pound in 1964, and they could feed a long table of hungry Sunday school children if the church mothers knew what to do with them. The auxiliary women cleaned and salted pork neck bones, dredged them in seasoned flour, browned them in a wide pan of lard, then smothered them under sliced onion, garlic, paprika, and 3 cups of broth. The whole pan went in the oven at 325 degrees for 2.5 hours until the meat fell off the bone and the gravy turned coffee dark. The pan came to the potluck still in its lid, set down on a folded towel so the gravy would not splash. Spooned over hot rice with bread on the side, a 35-cent pound stretched to 12 plates. By 2005, most fellowship halls had stopped serving them entirely. Fried chicken gizzards turned to partmost. People discarded into a beloved dish across Black communities. The gizzards were cleaned, simmered until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until crispy. The result was chewy yet tender inside with a crunchy exterior that shattered between teeth. Black families valued gizzards because butchers sold them cheaply, often free with whole chickens. Children learned to love the texture, eating them as snacks or alongside meals. The gizzards were served hot with hot sauce or eaten cold the next day. Some cooks boiled them in seasoned broth first, adding flavor before frying. Fried gizzards appeared at fish fries and church gatherings, stretching budgets while satisfying crowds. They proved skill could transform the least desirable cuts into something people craved.
Baked Jerusalem artichokes brought out the best in this often overlooked tuber, which had a mild, nutty flavor and a slightly sweet finish. Sometimes called sunchokes, they were scrubbed clean, sliced or halved, and tossed with a bit of oil before going into a hot oven. As they baked, their edges would crisp while the insides became tender and creamy, making them a perfect side dish for roasted meats or poultry. They had a texture similar to potatoes but a lighter taste, and they could be seasoned simply with salt and pepper or dressed up with herbs and garlic. This dish was common in late fall and winter when fresh vegetables were scarce, and it offered variety without straying from seasonal eating. Jerusalem artichokes were inexpensive when bought in bulk, making them a practical choice for large families. Baking them was also a no-fuss method that let their natural flavor shine without boiling away their richness. Brown sugar-baked beans were a hearty side dish, featuring slow-cooked beans sweetened with brown sugar and seasoned with spices to create a rich, comforting flavor. This recipe was a common accompaniment at family gatherings, barbecues, and everyday meals, highlighting beans as a nutritious and affordable protein source. The beans were simmered gently with molasses or brown sugar, onions, and sometimes bacon or ham hocks for added depth. The sweetness balanced the earthiness of the beans, making the dish both filling and flavorful. Rooted in Southern cooking traditions, brown sugar-baked beans reflected the importance of beans in African American diets and the ingenuity in seasoning them with pantry staples. Cooking the beans low and slow allowed flavors to meld, producing a dish that could feed large families economically. This recipe also symbolized communal meals and celebrations, where food brought people together around the table. It remains a beloved comfort food with strong ties to cultural identity.
Number 15, grilled quail from the morning hunt. Small birds, plucked and cleaned, split down the backbone and pressed flat, seasoned with salt, pepper, and a touch of cayenne, brushed with butter, and grilled fast over high heat. The breast cooked in minutes, 30 seconds too long, and the bird dried out completely. A grown man ate 3 or 4 and still reached for a rib. Children got one to hold in both hands and pick clean. The bones were thin enough to snap between your teeth. In the rural South, quail were common. Coveys flushed out of the brush along fence rows, and a morning hunt before the cookout could put a dozen birds on the grill by noon. The quail left the table when the farms consolidated and the hedgerows were cleared. The brush that held the coveys was plowed under for row crops, and by the 1990s, the only quail most families saw came frozen from a specialty store, priced like something that would have confused the generation that hunted them for nothing. Number 14, snap beans and new potatoes. Snap beans for the 4th came from a backyard garden, picked while still thin enough to break clean between 2 fingers. New potatoes were dug that same morning and dropped whole into the pot. A smoked neck or ham hock went in with water, salt, black pepper, and 1 dried red pepper pod. The pot held a low roll from morning until mid-afternoon, turning the beans silky and letting the potatoes soak up every grain of smoke. The liquid cooked down into something between a stock and a thin gravy. People spooned it over cornbread or drank it straight from the bowl. What made this dish was not the recipe. What made it was the garden. The beans were alive 2 hours before they hit the water. When family gardens disappeared and subdivisions paved the lots where pole beans once climbed, the dish moved to canned green beans and quartered russets. The name survived. The morning it required did not. Number 12, hot water cornbread. Not baked in a pan, not a muffin. Hot water cornbread was made by pouring boiling water over cornmeal, salt, and a pinch of sugar, stirring it into a thick paste, shaping it by hand into oblong patties, and frying them in deep oil until the outside turned into a shell and the inside stayed dense and slightly gummy. The boiling water was the key. It cooked the cornmeal before it touched the oil, which changed the texture entirely. Pan-baked cornbread crumbles apart. Hot water cornbread holds together like a fist. Green Book cafes serve 2 or 3 pieces alongside any plate as the bread course. No butter needed. The oil did the work. Hot water cornbread still survives in some homes across Mississippi and Alabama, but no restaurant serves it because every single piece must be shaped by hand. That labor does not scale. Number 19, stewed okra with tomatoes. This is the dish that held entire neighborhoods together during Prohibition and left almost no trace when it ended. In the juke joints and speakeasies of the Deep South, a cast iron pot of okra and tomatoes sat on the stove from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning. The okra came from backyard gardens, the tomatoes from mason jars put up the summer before, and the seasoning was whatever pork scrap sat in the icebox. Onions, garlic, a bay leaf, sometimes a dried pepper. It cooked low and slow until the okra broke down into a thick, silky stew that clung to a plate of rice like it belonged there. The pot never emptied. When it got low, the cook added water, more okra, another jar of tomatoes. It was the original endless bowl, and it cost the house almost nothing to keep running. Customers paid for drinks. The stew was the reason they stayed long enough to order another round. In the juke joints of rural Mississippi and Alabama, this pot fed field workers, musicians, and anyone who walked through the door on a Saturday night with enough change for a glass. After Prohibition, the juke joints that turned legal stripped down to a jukebox and a liquor license. The kitchen shrank or disappeared entirely. The communal pot of okra and tomatoes that once simmered for 2 days straight had no stove to sit on. The dish survived in home kitchens, but the speakeasy version, endless and shared, was finished. Number 19, liver and onions. By 1984, beef liver was selling for under $1 a pound at most black neighborhood grocery stores in cities like Cleveland and Baltimore, the cheapest cut sitting on the meat case. 2 large yellow onions were sliced thin and cooked low and slow in bacon grease until they turned the color of weak coffee and the kitchen filled with the sweet caramel smell. The liver was patted dry with paper towels, dusted in seasoned flour, heavy with black pepper, and dropped in the same skillet 3 minutes aside, no longer than that. Overcooking turned it to shoe leather, and every black grandmother had a daughter she had trained out of that mistake the hard way. Served with mashed potatoes and a tall glass of cold buttermilk, it was the iron-rich meal that doctors kept telling black families with anemia to eat more often. Liver and onions was medicine that tasted like supper. Number 15, persimmon pudding. Through about 1969, late November in the rural black South meant the wild persimmon trees behind the cemetery dropped their fruit soft and ripe, and the church mothers gathered them in coffee cans on the walk back from morning service. They mashed 2 cups of the orange pulp through a colander to take out the seeds, then beat it with white sugar, a stick of melted butter, 2 eggs, evaporated milk, flour, baking soda, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The thick batter went into a wide cake pan and baked at 325 degrees until the top crackled and the inside stayed soft like a steamed date pudding. Cut warm into squares at the fellowship table, it tasted of frost and honey. By 1990, the wild trees were gone and the pudding with them. Number 12, pig feet in vinegar sauce. You either loved them or you sat at the other end of the table. Pig feet were boiled for hours until the cartilage softened and the meat fell away from the knuckle. Then they were chilled in a bath of vinegar, onion, red pepper flakes, and bay leaf. You ate them cold with your hands. A jar of pickled pig feet sat in the refrigerator of every black grandmother in the South from the 1940s through the 1970s. A man in Birmingham bought a full case from a packing plant in 1974 for $2.60. He pickled them himself and brought a gallon jar to every reunion. The old folks ate them like candy. The young folks stared. By the 1980s, the price rose as packing plants exported more to markets where the price was higher. What had been a poor man's food became an export commodity. That's what happened. The jar disappeared from the table, not because anyone decided to stop. The economics changed underneath it. Number 7, saltfish fritters. Saltfish in a tin came off a boat in Red Hook on a Tuesday, sat in a kitchen sink in cold water for 2 days to leach the salt, then got flaked into a batter of the flour, scotch bonnet, scallion, thyme, and dropped into hot oil from a tablespoon. The fritter came out the size of a $50, the color of dark amber. Your auntie lined them on a sheet pan covered in newspaper and brought the pan down at 3. Children grabbed 2 at a time. Elders held one between thumb and finger and ate it in 3 bites. The fritter was a bridge food, a Caribbean recipe at a Black American block party, accepted without comment by 1976. By 1990, the saltfish had gotten expensive. Your auntie was working a second job on Saturdays, and the fritters showed up only at funerals. Hoppin' John carried African roots in every spoonful, combining black-eyed peas with rice in a dish sustaining families through hard times. The peas were simmered with ham hock until tender, then mixed with rice and cooked until grains absorbed the smoky broth. Some families added onions and peppers, while others kept it simple. The dish was especially important on New Year's Day, when eating it promised prosperity for the coming year. Black families made Hoppin' John regularly because ingredients were cheap and the dish was filling. One pot fed many mouths, stretching small amounts of meat across large families. Children grew up with this dish, its flavors becoming synonymous with home. Hoppin' John connected families to West African rice traditions that survived the Middle Passage.
Sorghum-glazed winter squash was a deeply flavored side that celebrated the richness of the season. Thick wedges of squash were brushed with sorghum syrup, a dark, robust sweetener with a flavor somewhere between molasses and honey. As the squash roasted, the syrup caramelized, creating a glossy, sticky coating that complemented the vegetable's natural sweetness. This dish was often made in late fall when squash was abundant and sorghum had just been harvested. The pairing created a warm, earthy taste perfect for holiday tables or Sunday suppers. The glaze also kept the squash moist, making each bite tender and flavorful. Sorghum-glazed squash was a celebration of seasonal cooking, using ingredients that were both locally grown and deeply tied to Southern traditions. It was a dish that looked as beautiful as it tasted, with its deep amber glaze catching the light.
Back to the list. Number 23, poke salad. The plant grew wild along fence rows and ditches across the South, and in spring, when the pantry was at its emptiest, women went out with a bucket and picked the young leaves before they turned toxic. Poke salad had to be boiled 3 separate times. The water poured off between each boil because the mature plant is poisonous. The old cookbooks were specific about this. 3 waters, no shortcuts. After the 3rd boil, the greens were fried in bacon grease with scrambled eggs. It was bitter, earthy, and free. The dish showed up in community cookbooks from East Tennessee to the Alabama Black Belt, always with the same warning about the 3 boils. Skip 1 and you would know it. Wild food foraging is trendy now, but for Black families in the rural South, it was Tuesday. Nobody called it foraging, they called it getting by. Number 25, smoked pork jowl carved at the table. The jowl was the cheek of the hog, a thick piece of meat and fat that sat on the smoker for hours until the fat turned translucent and the meat went dark and pull-apart tender. Sliced thin against the grain, it tasted like the richest bacon you ever put in your mouth, but thicker, softer, and smoky all the way through. Jowl cost next to nothing because most people walked right past it at the butcher counter. The families who smoked it learned from the generation before them, and the knowledge of how long to leave it and how thin to cut it never got written down. The cut vanished from cookout tables when butchers stopped breaking down whole hogs and started selling only the parts that had names people recognized. Number 24, hand-cranked ice cream made in the yard. A wooden bucket packed with rock salt and ice, a metal canister in the center, and a handle that somebody had to turn by hand for the better part of an hour. Vanilla custard was the standard, made that morning with eggs, cream, sugar, and a split vanilla bean if the house had one. Children took turns on the crank until their arms gave out, and then an uncle finished the job. The ice cream came out soft, not quite set, eaten straight from the canister with a long spoon while it was still melting. The hand-cranked freezer left the cookout when the electric machine replaced it, and then when the store replaced the machine. Nobody needed to churn for an hour when a half-gallon cost less than the rock salt. Number 19, pimento cheese. Pimento cheese was sharp cheddar grated by hand, mixed with mayonnaise, diced pimentos from a small glass jar, salt, and a pinch of cayenne. Some families added a spoonful of sweet pickle relish. Others kept it plain. The cheese was spread thick on white bread, scooped onto celery sticks, or served in a bowl with saltine crackers beside the grill. It was always cold, always orange, and always gone before the main meat came off the fire. Pimento cheese was a bridge dish, something that filled the gap between arriving at the cookout and eating the real meal. Children ate it on bread. Men ate it standing up with a cracker in one hand. The recipe required no cooking, no oven, and no special skill, just a strong arm and a mixing bowl. When pre-made pimento cheese appeared in plastic tubs at the grocery store, the homemade version lost its purpose. The store-bought kind was smoother, milder, and missing the uneven texture that came from hand grating. The bowl stopped being passed around because nobody made it from scratch anymore. Number 14, beef tripe stew. The smell gave it away before the menu did. Tripe stew, simmering on the back burner of a Green Book cafe, was not a neutral aroma. It filled the room. Some travelers walked in and turned around. The ones who stayed knew exactly what they were eating because they had grown up with it. Beef tripe, the muscular lining of a cow's stomach, required more preparation than any other dish on a cafe menu. The raw tripe had to be scrubbed, soaked in salted water, scrubbed again, boiled for an hour to soften, drained, cut into squares, and then simmered for another 2 to 3 hours with tomatoes, potatoes, onions, celery, and a splash of hot sauce, a bay leaf if the cook had one. The process took all morning. Most cafes ran it once a week on the same day the fresh delivery came from the butcher. It could not sit overnight. It had to be served the day it was made or not at all. The customers who ordered tripe were loyal to the point of planning their travel around it. A truck driver passing through Tuscaloosa who knew a particular cafe on Greensboro Avenue made tripe stew on Thursdays would time his whole route for a Thursday. The dish was that personal. It was also deeply divisive. People who ate tripe loved tripe. People who did not consider it unthinkable. There was no mild opinion. When the cafes closed, tripe stew did not migrate to chain restaurants or revival menus. Tripe is still used in menudo and fio, but the Southern Black Cafe version, stewed thick with tomatoes and potatoes and no chili heat, has no public home left. It survives only in kitchens that are going quiet one by one. Number 24, spare ribs with vinegar mop sauce. Spare ribs were the cheapest rack the butcher sold, and in the juke joints of Alabama, Mississippi, and East Texas, they got rubbed with salt and black pepper and slow cooked over a pit dug in the yard behind the building. The sauce was vinegar, red pepper flakes, and a little sugar mopped on with a rag tied to a stick. There was no bottled sauce. There was no recipe card. The pitmaster knew when they were done by the way the bone pulled clean. After repeal, the juke joints that survived moved the liquor inside and let the pit go cold. The ribs, cooked over open fire behind an illegal bar, became something nobody could legally replicate. Number 11, hog head cheese on saltines. The corner deli counter in every black neighborhood from Houston to Norfolk kept a loaf of pressed hog head cheese under glass right next to the bologna in 1984. A quarter pound cost about $1.10, sliced thin on the wax paper, wrapped in white butcher paper, and tied off with a string. Back at the kitchen table, the slices laid flat on saltine crackers with a smear of yellow mustard and a thin shaving of raw onion on top. Cold from the icebox, the gelatin held its shape and gave back a peppery, vinegary bite that woke up the whole mouth. Then, the mall food courts opened across the country and the corner deli counter quietly disappeared, taking the hog head cheese with it. Working grandfathers ate this lunch, standing at the counter on a Saturday afternoon. Hog head cheese was the working man's lunch the suburbs forgot. Number 16, sweet potato pone. Sweet potato pone was the country cousin of sweet potato pie, and in 1965, it outnumbered the pie 3-1 on the dessert end of the fellowship table. The grandmothers grated raw orange sweet potato on the same box grater they used for cabbage, then folded the shreds into beaten eggs, evaporated milk, brown sugar, nutmeg, allspice, and a quarter cup of melted butter. The whole pudding poured into a buttered baking dish and baked slowly for an hour and a half until the top crackled and the inside stayed dense and chewy like a soft pudding. Cut into squares, warm, eaten without a fork, it tasted of yams and sundae. By the 1990s, the pie won and the pone lost. Number 17, tea cakes. These were not cookies. Do not call them cookies. A black grandmother who heard you call her tea cakes cookies would correct you in a tone that ended the conversation. Tea cakes were flour, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and a touch of nutmeg. They were rolled thick, cut by hand, and baked until the edges barely turned golden. The inside stayed soft. A woman in Greenville, Mississippi baked 300 tea cakes for every family reunion from 1962 to 1985. She used a drinking glass to cut them because she said a cookie cutter made them too thin. She stacked them in a tin lined with wax paper. Children were allowed 2 each before dinner and as many as they could carry after. By the late 1980s, store-bought cookies had taken over. Younger women did not see the point of spending a whole afternoon baking something plain when you could buy you a bag of Chips Ahoy for $1. But the difference between a tea cake and a store-bought cookie was the same as the difference between a handwritten letter and a text message. Only one made you feel held. Number 14, sweet tea from a folding table jug, the deepest social ritual on this list. What most people miss about the tea is that it was never about the tea, it was about who poured. The jug was 2 gallons, glass with a plastic lid, set on a folding table at the corner of Lenox and 145th from 1 o'clock until the ice melted. The tea brewed all day on a windowsill in a sun jar, 4 Lipton bags floating in cold water under the August sun until the water turned the color of weak coffee. 2 cups of sugar went in warm. A whole lemon, sliced, floated on top like a small wheel. The jug came down by elevator at 1, set on the table by a woman in a church dress. She decided who got poured first. The order was not random. Eldest first, oldest woman before oldest man. Children with empty cups waited their turn without complaint because your mother had told you on the way down the stairs. The pour was 4 ounces. The cup was paper. The woman holding the jug had grown up on a porch in Greenville, South Carolina, where her own grandmother had poured the same way in the same order. The pouring was the social architecture of the block. Generation after generation, the rules were passed down by watching, not by telling. A man could be drunk on Schlitz and respected on the curb only if he held his cup out and said, "Please." A child could be loud all afternoon and still get poured if she came over quietly with both hands. By the late 1980s, the woman in the church dress had passed. Her daughter worked Saturdays, the jug was washed and put in a basement, and the tea on the new block was poured from a plastic Arizona bottle on a kitchen counter. The order of the pour was the first thing to die when the elders left. Hog maw was pig stomach cleaned, stuffed, and roasted until it became a dish feeding crowds during the 1920s. Preparing it required dedication, scrubbing the stomach thoroughly before stuffing with sausage, potatoes, onions, and seasonings. The stuffed stomach was sewn shut and roasted slowly until everything inside was tender and exterior crisped. When sliced, it revealed layers of filling surrounded by chewy, flavorful stomach lining. Black families served hog maw at holidays, the centerpiece of tables that might otherwise seem sparse. The dish used a part costing almost nothing while creating something impressive. Children watched mothers and grandmothers prepare it, learning the careful cleaning process. Hog maw represented transformation, turning what others rejected into something families celebrated together.
Cornmeal dumplings and greens were the kind of side dish that made a pot of collards or mustard greens feel even more filling. The dumplings were made from cornmeal, water, and a touch of salt, stirred into a soft dough and dropped right into the simmering pot liquor, the flavorful broth left from cooking the greens. As they cooked, the dumplings absorbed the smoky, savory taste from ham hocks or bacon drippings used in the greens. They puffed slightly but stayed tender, breaking apart easily with a fork. This was a way to stretch a meal, adding substance without needing expensive ingredients. Cornmeal dumplings were especially welcome during cooler months when a steaming plate of greens and dumplings could warm you through after a long day. They were rustic, unfussy, and deeply tied to the idea of making every part of a dish count. For many, the combination of greens, broth, and dumplings was as comforting as anything that came out of the oven.
Number 4, blackberry dumplings. Wild blackberries, picked from the brambles along the field edges, cooked down with sugar and water into a thick, bubbling sauce, then spoonfuls of biscuit dough dropped directly into the simmering fruit. Big Mama covered the pot and let the dumplings steam until they swelled and cooked through, soaking up the berry juice from the bottom while the top stayed pillowy and pale. The dish was served hot in bowls, the dumplings stained purple underneath and floating in a sauce that was equal parts fruit and syrup. Blackberry dumplings required nothing more than a bucket, a walk to the fence row, and the willingness to come home with scratched arms and stained fingers. When the brambles were cleared for development and the berries moved into plastic clamshells at the grocery store, the dumplings lost the ingredient that made them free. Number 13, smoked whole chicken, not pieces. The entire bird, rubbed down with salt, pepper, garlic, and cayenne, set on the cooler side of the grill with the lid closed and left alone for hours. The skin turned mahogany and tightened against the breast until it cracked when you pulled it. The drippings fell into the coals and sent up bursts of smoke that flavored the meat from the outside in. Smoked whole chicken was the quiet anchor of the cookout table. Nobody bragged about it the way they bragged about the ribs. It simply sat on a cutting board, pulled apart by hand, and everyone took what they wanted. It faded when the rotisserie chicken arrived at the grocery store for a few dollars. Already cooked, already warm, already sitting in a plastic shell by the checkout lane. Why stand over a grill for 4 hours when the answer was already waiting at the store on the way home? The food that got left behind was not the food that tasted bad. It was the food that looked poor. The organs, the offal, the parts of the animal that required explanation before anyone would touch them. A generation moved to the suburbs, bought gas grills, and served hamburgers and hot dogs because those were foods that needed no defense. Nobody had to explain a hamburger, but a plate of hog maw, a jar of brined pig feet, a bowl of chitlins at a cookout in a new subdivision required a kind of pride that not everyone was ready to show. The shame was quiet. The dishes simply stopped appearing, one cookout at a time, replaced by foods that blended in. The recipes that took the most work were the first to go because they asked the most of the people trying hardest to move on. Number 25, 3-bean salad, green beans, kidney beans, and wax beans were drained, tossed with sliced onion, vinegar, sugar, and oil, and left to sit overnight in the refrigerator. The salad was served cold in a glass bowl and placed between the heavier dishes on the table. It was sharp, sweet, and simple. The only real disagreement was over whether the onions should be raw or softened in the dressing first. 3-bean salad showed up at church suppers and 4th of July cookouts through the 1970s and 1980s, carried in a covered bowl with plastic wrap stretched tight across the top. It cost almost nothing to make and stretched to feed as many people as showed up. When cookout sides shifted toward creamy dips and store-bought trays in plastic containers, the vinegar salads were the first to be left behind. The Black 4th of July cookout could never be purchased. Thanksgiving had the butterball turkey. Christmas had the spiral-cut ham. Easter could be handled with a caterer, but the 4th required a community, not a receipt. The pit had to be built or borrowed. The sides came from 6 kitchens. The desserts were assigned weeks in advance. The men stood around the fire. The women commanded the table. The children ran between both. No restaurant replicated what those tables held because the food was never the full point. The gathering was the point. The food was proof the gathering was real. And when families scattered and the grandparents died, the cookout did not survive the distance. Number 7, neckbone purloo. Purloo was the Low Country's answer to the one-pot meal. Rice cooked in seasoned broth with whatever meat the cook had on hand. In Green Book cafes along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, the meat was almost always pork neck bones because neck bones were worth so little that butchers sometimes threw them in free with a larger order, and they flavored rice better than any expensive cut could. The cook started early. Neck bones hit the stock pot at 6 in the morning, covered in water with salt, pepper, a whole onion, and a celery stalk. By 10, the broth was rich and dark, and the meat had loosened from the small, awkward bones. The cook pulled the bones out, stripped the meat by hand, and returned it to the pot. Then the rice, long-grain Carolina rice, unwashed, stirred once, and left alone under a heavy lid. 20 minutes later, every grain sat separate, not sticky, carrying broth and fat. A plate of neckbone purloo cost 35 cents and kept a traveler full long enough to drive another 200 miles without stopping. Every ingredient was either dried or nearly free: rice, salt, pepper, onion. The only thing that needed to be fresh was the neck bones, and those arrived every morning. After the cafes closed, purloo survived in home kitchens across the Sea Islands. Families made it for funerals and reunions. But neck bones followed oxtails up the price ladder, and the dish that once cost less than a loaf of bread became something people thought twice about making. The last cafe that served purloo as a daily plate closed before most people alive today ever tasted it. Number 23, Hoppin' John with fatback. Black-eyed peas, cooked down with rice and a slab of fatback, was a New Year's dish across the Black South, but in speakeasies it showed up year-round. It was cheap to make in bulk and it filled the room. In the rent parties of Harlem, A pot of Hoppin' John on the stove was part of the admission price. A quarter at the door bought food, music, and a packed apartment. The money went straight to the landlord. After Prohibition, rent parties faded as Harlem's economy shifted. The communal pot of Hoppin' John that once paid someone's housing disappeared from the table it was built to save. Number 10, collard greens with salt pork. 3 bunches of fresh collard greens from the Saturday morning farm stand cost $1.50 in 1985 and filled one of our brown paper sacks taller than a gallon of milk. The leaves were washed 3 times in cold sink water to chase out the grit, stripped off the tough center stem, stacked and rolled and sliced into thick green ribbons. A chunk of salt pork the size of a deck of cards went into the pot first, rendered down over a low flame until the kitchen smelled like a smokehouse on a winter morning. The greens piled in by the handful, wilted down, covered with water, hit with crushed red pepper, a splash of cider vinegar, and a long shake of black pepper. 2 hours later, the pot liquor turned dark amber and the leaves went silky. A working grandmother in rural Alabama poured the pot liquor into a coffee cup and drank it like medicine. Collard greens were the supper that drank like a tonic. Number 25, hot water cornbread pones. Forget the sweet yellow square that bakeries call cornbread now. In 1962, the church kitchen produced hand-shaped pones made by pouring scalding water straight into white stone ground cornmeal with a teaspoon of salt and a heavy finger of bacon grease whisked in. The cornmeal cooked from the heat of the water alone. The deaconesses shaped the warm dough into oblong patties between 2 cupped palms, leaving the marks of their fingerprints in the sides, and fried them in a flat skillet of pure white lard until the outside cracked open golden and the inside steamed white. They went to the long fellowship table 6 pones to a platter, wrapped in a clean flour sack to stay hot. Crisp outside, soft as wet grits inside, they needed nothing but cold butter and the pot liquor from a pot of collard greens. By 1980, almost no Sunday school child in town had ever eaten one. Number 15, chow chow relish. This was the condiment that tied the whole table together. You put it on everything: black-eyed peas, greens, cornbread, barbecue. Chow chow was a pickled relish made from green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, peppers, mustard seed, and vinegar. Every woman who made it swore her recipe was different. A grandmother in Orangeburg, South Carolina, started making chow chow in 1949 and did not stop until 2002. She grew every ingredient in a garden behind her house on land her grandfather had bought in 1919. She chopped everything by hand. She cooked it in a pot that belonged to her mother. She brought 18 jars to every reunion and ran out before the peach cobbler was served. Chow chow was not just a relish. It was a calendar. It told you the season was changing. It told you someone still had a garden. That was the part that mattered, because by the 1990s, the gardens were disappearing. Generation after generation of women who grew their own food were passing. Their children had moved to apartments in Memphis and Birmingham and Houston. The jars stopped showing up, and the table felt different without them. Not wrong, but incomplete. Number 18, curry goat in foil trays. On Caribbean black blocks in Crown Heights and Flatbush, the foil tray that drew the longest line was the curry goat. Goat shoulder cubed, seasoned with Jamaican curry powder, Scotch bonnet, thyme, and a tin of allspice from a shop on Nostrand. It cooked 4 hours on a back burner in an apartment that smelled like a country your auntie had left in 1971. The tray came down with a ladle stuck in it. White rice underneath, gravy on top, a piece of hard dough bread on the side to push the gravy onto the spoon, the way you would push a memory onto a page. Black American kids tasted it and went home asking their mothers why their own food did not have that smell. The trays sat next to the collards. Both got finished. By 1995, the cook was a citizen. Her children spoke without an accent, and the goat had moved into a takeout box on Church Avenue for $9. Number 17, pound cake from Aunt Jemima or Sarah Lee. Not every cake on the block was made from scratch. Some came in a yellow box from the bottom shelf of the corner store, like a small confession. A working mother got home at 6 on Friday, slid the foil pan into the oven, came out to the table with the smell of vanilla in the kitchen, and called it her own. The act of pulling it from the oven was the act of caring. Sarah Lee pound cake on a paper plate with a spoon of canned peaches on top from a Del Monte tin was a curb dessert in 1974 that nobody apologized for. The frozen food aisle was a friend to a mother working 2 shifts. The thing is, the cake was never about the cake. It was about who slid it in the oven for you. By 1990, the freezer aisle had grown bigger. The homemade pound cake had moved into a once-a-year holiday slot, and the Saturday curb cake was a sheet from the Pathmark Bakery, plastic domed with no story attached. Black-eyed pea soup stretched a handful of dried peas into enough food to feed a crowd. The peas were sorted, soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with ham hocks, onions, and available seasonings. As they cooked, peas softened and released starch, thickening broth into something between soup and stew. Some families added greens or tomatoes, while others kept it simple, letting smoky pork and earthy peas carry flavor. The soup was ladled over rice or cornbread, creating complete protein at minimal cost. Black-eyed peas grew well in southern soil, and families raised their own, drying them for winter. The dish carried cultural significance associated with good luck on New Year's Day. Black-eyed pea soup represented hope and resilience, nourishing body and spirit.
Braised celery with onion was a soft, savory side that transformed humble vegetables into something rich and satisfying. Celery ribs were cut into lengths and simmered slowly with sliced onions in broth or a mix of butter and water until tender enough to cut with a fork. The cooking mellowed the celery's sharpness, while the onions added sweetness and depth. This dish often appeared when celery was plentiful or left over from making stocks and soups. Braising gave it a warmth that raw celery never had, making it feel more at home next to roasted meats or poultry. It was simple enough for weekday dinners, yet refined enough for special occasions, and it made good use of inexpensive ingredients that might otherwise be overlooked. Braised celery with onion was a reminder that with patience and seasoning, even the most ordinary vegetables could earn a place of honor on the table.
Number 5, cake crumb pudding. Stale cake crumbled by hand into a baking dish, soaked with sweetened milk and beaten eggs, then baked until the top turned golden and the center set into a soft custard. Big Mama used whatever cake had gone dry. Pound cake, yellow cake, the last wedge of coconut cake nobody finished Sunday. The result was richer than bread pudding because the cake had already been sweetened and flavored before it ever went stale. Cake crumb pudding was the final stop before the trash can, proof that even a dessert that had already been served and forgotten still had one more life left in it. The dish never appeared in published cookbooks because it was never planned. It was invented each time from whatever crumbs were at hand. Number 6, chicken purloo cooked in a cast iron pot over a wood fire, not jambalaya, not pilaf. Purloo, a dish that lived along the Carolina and Georgia coast, built from a whole cut-up chicken, browned in fat, rice added to the same pot with onion, celery, and enough broth to cook it all together until the rice absorbed every drop of flavor. The grains came out separate, stained golden from the chicken fat, and the meat fell apart into the rice so that every spoonful carried both. At the cookout, The pot sat on a grate over an open fire, and the person tending it knew by sound when the rice was done. The bubbling slowed, the steam changed. Purlieu required no oven, no timer, and no thermometer. It required someone who had cooked it enough times to know by ear and smell when to pull it off the heat. The dish faded when the open fire left the yard and when the word itself stopped being spoken. Ask for purlieu at a cookout today, and most people under 50 will not know what you mean. The food did not die, the name did, and without the name, the recipe lost its anchor. Number 28, pickled peaches. Peaches picked firm were peeled and simmered whole in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves until they turned soft and translucent. The jars were sealed weeks before the 4th and brought out cold, straight from the back of the refrigerator. They were served alongside the meat, not the dessert. The sweetness cut through the smoke and the salt on the plate. The vinegar kept them honest. Pickled peaches came from a time when every fruit had a second life in a jar, and the women who made them planned a holiday months before it arrived. The process required a kitchen built for standing on a hot afternoon, a stock pot, and jars that were saved and reused until the glass chipped. When home canning stopped being routine, the pickled peaches stopped with it. Nobody bought a jar to replace them. Number 23, fried corn. Not cream corn from a can, not corn on the cob. Fried corn in a Green Book cafe meant fresh kernels cut straight off the ear and cooked in rendered fat with a little sugar and salt until the edges browned and the natural starch thickened into something close to pudding. It came as a side on nearly every plate from June through September. The cook needed nothing but a sharp knife, a hot skillet, and corn that was picked that morning. When the cafes closed, fried corn held on in home kitchens for another generation. But by the 1990s, frozen and canned corn had replaced the fresh ear entirely. The dish requires corn picked the same day to work. Stale kernels do not release enough starch. That is why it never traveled. Number 20, fried porgies. Nobody with money wanted porgy. In the coastal speakeasies of Charleston and Savannah, that made it perfect. Bought whole from the docks for almost nothing, scaled and gutted in the back, dredged in cornmeal and salt, and fried in a pan of lard until the skin crackled. A plate of fried porgies with a wedge of lemon and a piece of bread was a full meal at a speakeasy table. The fish was sweet and firm when fresh and worthless a day later, which meant it moved fast. After repeal, the waterfront speakeasy shut down. Legal fish houses served shrimp and flounder. Porgy dropped off the plate and onto the bait hook. Number 24, pinto beans and ham hocks. Open the bag of dry pinto beans and you're looking at the cornerstone of the 1980s soul food pantry. A pound sold for 50 cents at the Piggly Wiggly, and a single smoked ham hock cost less than $1.50. Soak the beans overnight in a cold pot of water. The next morning, drain them, add the hock, cover with fresh water, and let it bubble all afternoon. The pork fat melted into the broth and turned plain beans into something that tasted like Sunday. Grandmothers in Birmingham and Memphis kept this pot going on the back burner from Monday through Wednesday, adding water as it cooked down. Served over rice with a slice of raw onion on the side, it fed 4 working adults for under $3. Church kitchens used the same trick for fellowship suppers, doubling the recipe in a stock pot the size of a car battery. Pinto beans were the workhorse of every black kitchen that survived the Reagan years. Number 22, Sister Pearl May's 3-layer congealed salad. Most of these forgotten dishes carry no name with them anymore, just a memory of a Pyrex pan. But in fellowship halls across the rural South, the three-layer congealed salad belonged to one archetype that existed in every congregation, the Sister Pearl May. Every black church had one. She sat fourth pew on the left, ran the women's auxiliary, and brought the same Pyrex 9x13 pan every fifth Sunday from about 1959 to 1971. The first layer was lime jello set with crushed pineapple and grated carrot. She poured that on Friday night. Saturday morning, she poured the middle layer, a tinted cream cheese and mayonnaise mixture stretched with a packet of Knox plain gelatin, white as a hymnal page. By Saturday afternoon, she added the top cherry jello suspended with halved maraschinos and crushed pecans from her own backyard tree. The whole thing set Sunday morning before the sunrise service. She carried it across two pews on a folded dish towel, never letting it tip. The Sister Pearl May of any given congregation in 1965 was usually a widow in her 60s, often a retired school cook, almost always the woman who counted offering envelopes on Monday morning. The salad was hers because the 4-shelf icebox in her kitchen was the only one in walking distance with that much vertical space. After integration, after the supermarkets came and the Pyrex set in her cupboard chipped past use, the recipe traveled nowhere. Younger women called it old-fashioned. The Sister Pearl May of each church passed on, and the 3-layer congealed salad with her. Few people talk about how much culinary memory in the black church walked out the door wrapped in a dish towel. A whole strata of Sunday food lived in one woman's icebox, and when she went home, the layered salad went with her. Number 21, possum and sweet potatoes. Nobody talks about this one, not anymore. But in the 1940s through the 1970s, it was a legitimate reunion dish in parts of Georgia and rural Mississippi. A man would trap the possum, pen it for a week on table scraps and sweet potatoes, then roast it whole in a pan surrounded by halved sweet potatoes basted in the drippings. The meat was dark, rich, and greasy. The sweet potatoes absorbed the fat and caramelized into something that tasted like a savory dessert. During the Depression, possum suppers were fundraising events for black churches. A church in Decatur, Georgia, held one every fall from 1932 to 1968. By the late 1970s, the tradition had faded. Younger men did not trap. Health departments frowned on wild game at gatherings, and the cultural association shifted. The dish didn't disappear because it tasted bad. It disappeared because people were told it was something to be ashamed of. Number 20, macaroni and cheese baked in church pan-sized casseroles. The pan was the same one that had carried bake sale lasagna to the basement of Mount Olive Baptist for 10 years. Deep, dented in two corners. It could feed 30 children. The macaroni cooked in a stock pot before sundown. The cheese was a brick of cheddar grated by hand while the radio played WBLS. Layer macaroni, layer cheese, layer macaroni, layer cheese. Evaporated milk poured over, paprika on top, into the oven for 45 minutes. The crust was the prize. The corner pieces were promised to the woman who carried the pan like a tribute. Nobody disputed it. The thing is, the recipe was never written down. It was passed down by watching. By 1988, the deep pan had cracked. The church basement was rented out for funerals only, and the recipe got reduced to a shoebox pan version that fed 8, not 30. Fried salt pork was everyday protein for black families who could not afford fresh meat regularly. Pork belly was cured in heavy salt and stored in barrels, ready to be sliced whenever needed. The slices were soaked to remove excess salt, then fried in their own fat until edges crisped and meat turned golden. Served alongside grits, eggs, or bread. Fried salt pork, delivered satisfying flavor, making plain meals feel complete. The rendered fat was never wasted, save for cooking vegetables or gravy. Salt pork required no refrigeration, essential for families without ice boxes. A single barrel lasted months, providing protein through seasons when hunting was poor or gardens dormant. Children grew up with this taste as foundation of countless meals, its richness becoming the flavor of home.
Celery with pimento cheese was one of those deceptively simple side dishes that could make a table look instantly dressed up. Crisp celery sticks were washed and cut into even lengths, their natural hollow centers making the perfect pocket for creamy, tangy pimento cheese. The spread was usually made from sharp cheddar, mayonnaise, and chopped pimentos, giving it a rich yet slightly sweet flavor that paired beautifully with the freshness of the celery. It was the kind of dish you might see at church socials, Sunday suppers, or holiday tables, where the bright red pimento against the pale green celery gave a cheerful splash of color. This dish was inexpensive, quick to prepare, and surprisingly filling, making it a favorite for feeding large gatherings without spending much. Its balance of crunch and creaminess made it memorable, and it carried with it a kind of homemade elegance that does not come from store-bought trays. This was not your average stew. Son of a Gun stew was a chuck wagon classic, made from every edible part of a calf: heart, liver, marrow, tongue, and sometimes even the brain if it had not gone to the dogs first. Cowboys did not waste a single bite, and the trail cook was expected to know how to turn those scraps into something halfway decent. The stew simmered in cast iron over open flame, thickened with flour or old coffee grounds, and flavored with salt if you were lucky enough to have it. A pot of Son of a Gun was more than food. It was a reminder that survival meant using everything you had, no matter how it looked or smelled going in. It filled you up, kept your strength, and tasted better than it had any right to after riding a horse all day. The name? That came from the fact that nobody ever wanted to admit what was actually in it. This was food for hard men under hard skies, and it stuck to your bones like nothing else.
Number 21. Fried green tomatoes brought from a skillet by the pit. Firm, unripe tomatoes, sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal and seasoned flour, and fried in a cast iron skillet set on a side burner or on a grate prop next to the main fire. The outside turned golden and crunchy, while the inside stayed tart and dense, nothing like the soft sweetness of a ripe tomato. Green tomatoes at the cookout meant the garden was still producing, and somebody had the patience to stand over hot grease while everyone else sat in the shade. The slices came out on a plate lined with a paper bag stacked like coins, and they never lasted more than a few minutes. The dish left when the garden gave way to the driveway, and grocery store tomatoes arrived already red. A green tomato from a store was just an unripe tomato. The ones from the yard were a different thing entirely, picked on purpose by someone who knew exactly what to do with them. Number 26, fried croaker. Croaker was a bottom-feeding saltwater fish that ran cheap along the Atlantic coast from the Chesapeake to North Florida. The fish was small enough to fry whole, dipped in seasoned cornmeal, and dropped into hot oil in a cast iron Dutch oven set up in the yard. The skin crisped into a thin shell. The white meat underneath stayed moist and carried a faint sweetness from the sea. Fried croaker was a coast and low country cookout tradition stretching back generations. Families near the water caught them that morning with a cane pole and a bucket. Families inland bought them packed on ice from a truck that made rounds through the neighborhood on Fridays and before holidays. When the fish trucks stopped running in the 1980s, fried croaker at the 4th of July went with them. The grocery store never stocked what that truck carried. Number 20, country captain chicken. This dish entered the South through the port of Savannah, where spice traders brought curry powder from India in the early 1800s. By the 1940s, Green Book cafes in Georgia served their own version. Chicken pieces browned in a skillet, then stewed with tomatoes, onions, green peppers, currants, and a heavy shake of curry powder served over white rice with a handful of toasted almonds on top. Country Captain was the only curry dish most black travelers ever encountered at a Southern table. But by the 1970s, curry powder had fallen out of Southern cooking almost entirely. The dish retreated to a handful of church supper tables and then vanished. Today, most people under 60 have never heard of Country Captain, and most over 60 have not tasted it since childhood. Number 28, smothered liver and onions. Beef liver cost next to nothing in the 1920s because most butcher shops could not move it fast enough. In the back rooms of black speakeasies from Atlanta to Detroit, it got sliced thin, dredged in flour, and smothered under a heap of caramelized onions and thick brown gravy. The plate was heavy and filling, which was the point. Customers who ate well drank longer and spent more. After repeal in 1933, the speakeasy kitchens that served it closed, and legal restaurants had no interest in a dish built for a room that was never supposed to exist. Liver landed on diner menus eventually, but that speakeasy version, drowned in onions and served on a tin plate, was gone. Number 16, black-eyed peas and rice. The pot of black-eyed peas was the dish that carried a year of luck and a week of meals in the same heavy lid. A pound bag of dry peas cost 40 cents at the corner grocery in 1987. A single smoked turkey wing cost $1, and the two of them simmered together for 2 hours with onion and garlic until they tasted older than the kitchen they were cooked in. The broth turned brown and smoky and clung to every grain of long grain rice underneath. Served over hot white rice with a splash of vinegar hot sauce and a side of chopped raw onion, it was the cheapest, complete protein supper a black working household could put together in the late 1980s. Hoppin' John was the Carolina name for it, but Detroit and Chicago grandmothers cooked the exact same pot and just called it Wednesday. Black-eyed peas were luck you could eat with a spoon. Number 29, chow chow relish. By 1963, every fellowship hall in the rural South had at least 3 jars of homemade chow chow lined up next to the cornbread platter, each one labeled with masking tape and a different woman's last name. The church mothers chopped end-of-season green tomatoes, white cabbage, sweet onion, and red bell pepper from their own backyard rows, then packed it all into pint jars with brine made from cider vinegar, white sugar, yellow mustard seed, celery seed, and a thumb of turmeric. The pot simmered on the back of the stove all afternoon. It cured for 3 weeks in a back pantry shelf before it ever met a plate of pintos. A spoonful of bright yellow chow chow on top of hot beans and a wedge of cornbread was Tuesday supper at home and Sunday dinner at church. The mason jars went home empty and washed. Almost nobody under 60 has tasted real homemade chow chow since 1985. Number 19, smothered rabbit. This was the dish that started the argument. Every family had someone who claimed they made the best one. A man in Tuskegee, Alabama, hunted rabbits on his own land every fall from 1955 to 1983. He skinned them, soaked them overnight in salt water, dredged them in seasoned flour, browned them in a cast iron skillet, then smothered them in a gravy made from the pan drippings, onions, and a little water. The rabbit simmered on low heat for 2 hours until the meat slid from the bone. He served it over white rice. The whole plate cost him nothing but time and a box of shells. At the reunion, his pan was always empty first. His wife brought the side dishes. He brought the rabbit. That was the arrangement for 28 years. The thing about smothered rabbit is that it required a man who knew the land, knew where the rabbits ran, knew which fields had been sprayed and which had not. That knowledge was passed from father to son, in the same backyard where the reunion happened. But by the 1980s, the sons had moved to Atlanta and Detroit and Chicago. The land got sold or sat empty. The rabbits kept running, but nobody was out there to catch them. By 1990, you could not find smothered rabbit at a reunion in Macon County. The men who made it were buried in the same churches where the reunions used to end with a prayer. Number 8, coconut bread and hard dough bread from the Brooklyn Caribbean bakeries. On Saturday morning, the line outside the bakery on Nostrand and Empire stretched 20 deep. The hard dough loaves were still warm in the brown paper. They went home in shopping bags and onto the folding table on the curb by 2 o'clock. Your auntie sliced it with a serrated knife borrowed from the upstairs kitchen. Each slice was thick like a slab of warm cake. The bread was the side for the curry goat, the side for the saltfish fritter, the breakfast for the elder who had not eaten since 6. Coconut bread came in a smaller loaf, denser, sweeter, with shredded coconut visible in the crumb. By 1995, the bakery was still open, but the bread no longer came down to the curb because the curb itself was empty. Fried okra was summer's gift, turning green pods into crispy bites that disappeared as fast as they hit the plate. The okra was sliced into rounds, tossed in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in hot lard until golden and crunchy. The coating sealed in moisture while eliminating sliminess that put some people off. Each piece delivered satisfying crunch, followed by tender vegetable within. Families grew okra in gardens because it thrived in southern heat when other vegetables struggled. Children picked pods in the morning before sun grew too hot, bringing baskets where mothers waited with cornmeal ready. Fried okra was eaten immediately, standing at the stove between batches because it never lasted long enough to reach the table. The dish was free food transformed into something everyone craved.
Pan-fried corn patties were the kind of side dish that made the kitchen smell warm and inviting before you even sat down to eat. Made with cornmeal, fresh corn kernels, milk, and just enough seasoning to bring out their natural sweetness, they were shaped into small cakes and fried in a shallow skillet until golden on each side. The crust was crisp, the inside soft and full of fresh corn flavor, and they were often served alongside greens, beans, or fried fish. Some cooks added a pinch of sugar for a sweeter bite, while others kept them savory with onions or peppers. These patties were a perfect way to use up leftover corn or stretch a small amount to feed more mouths, making them as practical as they were delicious. They also traveled well, so they could be wrapped and taken along for a quick snack during long workdays in the fields or at the docks.
Number 19, hoe cake. The name was literal. Before the American Revolution, enslaved field workers cooked cornmeal batter on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire. There was no kitchen, no oven, no table. There was a tool meant for digging, repurposed for cooking, because it was the only flat piece of metal within reach. The earliest written references appear in Virginia plantation records from the 1700s, where overseers noted that enslaved people baked cakes on their hoes during midday breaks. By the early 1800s, hoe cake had migrated indoors. Cast iron griddles replaced the hoe blade, and the recipe appeared in nearly every Southern cookbook published before the Civil War. But the name stuck. Hoe cake, a word that carries inside it the full history of Black cooking in America, making something nourishing out of almost nothing, using tools that were never designed for the purpose. The batter itself was the simplest thing imaginable. Cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, cooked flat until the edges brown. Some versions added a spoonful of lard. Some added buttermilk, but the original needed nothing more than meal, water, and heat. Abraham Lincoln reportedly ate hoe cakes as a child in Kentucky. Frederick Douglass wrote about them. The dish crossed every line of class and color in the antebellum South. And then it vanished. Not because it stopped tasting good, but because the name reminded people of something the country wanted to forget. The garden hoe hanging in the shed became just a garden tool again. The cake baked on it became just cornbread, and the people who invented it became a footnote in someone else's cookbook. Number 23, the outdoor catfish fry. This was not a dish, it was a station, a propane burner on bare dirt, a cast iron pot of peanut oil, a paper bag of seasoned cornmeal on a folding chair, and somebody's uncle who did not leave that post until the oil went cold. The catfish came from the pond or the creek, not the store. Whole fish, gutted and scaled that morning, dredged in cornmeal and dropped into oil that was already popping. The table was yesterday's newspaper. The plate was a paper towel, hot sauce and white bread on the side. The catfish fry was a cookout within the cookout, a separate event with its own crowd, its own schedule, and its own rules. Children were warned once and kept back by a grandmother who did not warn twice. The fish came out golden with a cornmeal crust that cracked when you bit through it and white, steaming meat that pulled clean from the bone. It disappeared for reasons nobody could argue with. Hot oil in a yard full of running children. A propane tank 3 feet from a charcoal grill. By the 1990s, the catfish fry moved indoors, then to the restaurant. Then it stopped being a family event altogether. Number 22, smoked ox tongue, peeled after smoking, sliced thin across the grain and laid out on a platter. Rich, beefy, with a texture denser than any roast on the table. People who did not know what it was asked for seconds. People who found out what it was put the plate down and did not come back. Tongue was a dish that punished curiosity. It tasted extraordinary and looked like exactly what it was. And by the 1980s, that combination was no longer welcome at the cookout. The butcher counter shrank. The cuts that needed a story stopped selling, and tongue left the yard for good. Number 21, chess pie. Chess pie was nothing more than butter, sugar, eggs, and a splash of vinegar or buttermilk poured into a single crust and baked until the top cracked and turned golden brown. The filling set into something between a custard and a caramel, dense enough to hold its shape on a paper plate in the heat. Nobody knows where the name came from. One story says a woman was asked what kind of pie she made and answered, "It is just pie." Another says the word came from cheese, a colonial term for curd desserts. What mattered was that chess pie required no fruit, no icebox, and no decoration. It was a pantry pie made from what every black kitchen already had on hand. At a 4th of July cookout, chess pie sat on the dessert table between the cobblers and the layer cakes and disappeared first because it was small, sweet, and rich enough that a thin slice was all anyone needed. When bakeries started selling pies by the box, the homemade chess pie stopped showing up. The recipe survived in handwriting on index cards tucked inside cabinet doors. The pie itself did not survive the convenience aisle. Number 4, molasses pie. Before refined sugar was cheap, molasses sweetened everything in the South. Molasses pie was the simplest dessert on any Green Book Cafe menu and the cheapest to make. Molasses, eggs, a little butter, vanilla, and a pinch of salt poured into a single crust and baked until the filling set firm and the top turned glossy. The taste was dark, nearly bitter, with the mineral depth that sugar pies never carried. It paired with black coffee the way pecan pie pairs with whipped cream today. Molasses pie disappeared for the same reason molasses left most Southern kitchens. Refined sugar became cheaper by the mid-1960s, and the regional palate shifted with it. The South moved from dark and complex to bright and sweet. The pie followed the dark. Number 21, sweet potato biscuits. a breakfast offering in the buffet flats of Chicago and St. Louis. These biscuits were served to guests who had stayed the night. They were dense, faintly sweet, and made with mashed sweet potato folded into the dough before baking. They soaked up gravy or stood alone with a cup of chicory coffee. The women who ran those flats baked them before dawn and stacked them under a cloth on the kitchen counter. After 1933, the overnight buffet flat trade collapsed. The breakfast that followed it, sweet potato biscuits and coffee in a kitchen that doubled as a living room, had no reason to continue. There is something most food histories leave out. For 13 years, the Speakeasy was the only restaurant most Black Americans could own. Jim Crow kept Black diners out of white establishments across the South and in most of the North. There was no sitting at the counter. There was no table by the window. But behind an unmarked door, a Black woman with a stove and a bottle could run her own business, set her own prices, and feed her own people without asking permission from anyone. The buffet flat was not just a place to drink. It was the first Black-owned dining room in a country that refused to seat Black customers. The food that came out of those kitchens was not restaurant food. It was survival food dressed up for a Saturday night. And when Prohibition ended, the legal world that replaced it did not make room for the people who had built something real in the dark. Number 2, cheese, grits, and eggs. By 6 in the morning in every Black Southern kitchen, the pot of yellow grits was already bubbling slow on the back burner with a heavy shake of salt and a knob of butter. A cup of quick grits cost under 30 cents and fed 4 working adults heading out the door. The grits cooked for 10 minutes until they turned creamy and thick. Then a heavy handful of grated cheddar melted into the pot off the heat and turned the whole batch the color of a sunset. 2 eggs, fried over easy in bacon grease, landed on top of a deep bowl of grits, the yolks broken with the side of a fork so the gold ran down into the cheese. A slice of cheap toast on the side mopped the bowl clean. Black grandfathers in Charleston and Savannah ate this breakfast standing at the counter before the first whistle. Cheese, grits, and eggs were the Southern fuel that started the workday. Number 27, liver pudding. Up through about 1968, a slab of cold liver pudding showed up on every Carolina church potluck table, sliced thick and laid out on saltines with hot sauce. The deacons made it from pork liver, head meat, cornmeal, sage, and black pepper, cooked down in a tall stock pot for half a Saturday, then poured into loaf pans to set in the spring house. A pound cost about 30 cents at the country market. The young ushers ate it cold straight off the cracker. The elders fried it in slices. After integration brought new grocery brands into the South, store liverwurst quietly replaced it. The home recipe walked out with the women who knew it. Number 4, banana pudding with vanilla wafers in foil pans. Banana pudding on the block was a layered pan. Vanilla wafers on the bottom, sliced bananas, vanilla custard from a Jell-O cook and serve box, more wafers, more bananas, more custard, meringue on top from 3 egg whites whipped by hand for 10 minutes until your auntie's wrist hurt. The pan went in the broiler for 2 minutes to brown the meringue and came out the color of a paper bag. She covered it with foil and carried it down at 4. The serving spoon was a long iced tea spoon. Each kid got a small portion in a paper cup. The wafer at the bottom of the cup had turned to cake by then, soaked in custard like a small cobblestone of childhood. By 1990, the cook and serve box had been replaced by instant pudding, the meringue had been replaced by Cool Whip, and the dish on the curb had moved into a plastic Tupperware in a kitchen. Ash cakes were among the oldest breads in African American cooking, dating back to enslavement when ovens were unavailable. The recipe required only cornmeal, water, and salt mixed into stiff dough. This dough was shaped into flat rounds, wrapped in dampened cabbage leaves, and buried in hot ashes. The leaves protected the bread while allowing heat to cook it slowly. After 20 minutes, the cakes emerged with smoky flavor and dense texture. During the 1920s, families without reliable stoves still turned to this ancient method. The technique required no equipment, just fire and patience. Children watched grandmothers make ash cakes, learning skills connecting them to ancestors who cooked this bread under harsher conditions. Ash cakes were survival, transformed into something warm and nourishing.
Wilted lettuce with bacon drippings was a warm salad that felt indulgent in its simplicity. Fresh garden lettuce was placed in a large bowl, and hot bacon fat was poured directly over it, slightly wilting the tender leaves. The heat released the greens' aroma while coating them in a smoky, savory flavor. Some cooks added a splash of vinegar or a sprinkle of sugar to balance the richness, creating a dressing that was made in the moment right from the skillet. This dish often appeared at midday meals when greens were plentiful and bacon grease was already in use from breakfast. The warm dressing transformed the salad into something more satisfying than a typical cold side, and it carried with it the unmistakable flavor of home cooking. Wilted lettuce with bacon drippings reminded people that even the simplest garden produce could be elevated with just a little ingenuity and a cast-iron skillet. Okra fritters were a beloved snack or side dish featuring chopped okra mixed into a seasoned batter and fried to golden crispiness. These fritters combined the natural sliminess of okra with crunchy breading to create a texture that was both unique and comforting. Popular in African American cooking, okra was a widely cultivated vegetable with deep roots tracing back to African cuisine. The fritters were often served alongside main dishes or enjoyed as a casual treat, showcasing the versatility of okra beyond stews and soups. The batter typically included cornmeal or flour, herbs, and spices to enhance the flavor and add a satisfying bite. Okra fritters were a practical and tasty way to celebrate local produce while creating a dish that appealed to all ages. Their crispy exterior and tender interior made them a crowd favorite at family dinners and community gatherings. This recipe exemplifies how traditional ingredients were elevated through simple, skillful preparation.
Number 18, homemade muscadine wine poured from a mason jar. Somebody's uncle or grandfather made it every fall when the muscadines came ripe on the vine that grew along the back fence or up into a tree at the edge of the yard. The grapes were thick-skinned and musky, and the wine was made in a crock with sugar and patience. It came out dark and cloudy, never filtered, and tasted like nothing from any store. Sharp and sweet and heavy with the smell of grape hull. At the cookout, the jar moved quietly among the older folks, poured into cups that were not labeled and never discussed around the children. The wine stopped when the person who made it passed away and nobody learned the timing. The vine got cut down or the property changed hands and the muscadines went back to feeding the birds. Number 17, fried chicken gizzards. Boiled first in salted water to soften the dense muscle, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried crisp in a cast iron skillet until they turn dark gold. Chewy, compact, iron-rich, with a flavor that sat heavier than any other part of the bird. Served in a bowl with hot sauce at the cookout, always as a side, never the main attraction. Gizzards were the dish that sorted children early. A 5-year-old who was handed one and chewed through it without complaint would eat them for life. A 5-year-old who spit it out was lost forever. There was no converting anyone after that first encounter. Gizzards disappeared when the younger generation drew a hard line at anything that could be described as organ meat, and once the demand dropped, the bowl stopped being refilled. Number 9, red velvet cake. Red velvet at a 4th of July cookout was not the cream cheese tower from a bakery window. It was a 3-layer cake dyed red with 2 bottles of food coloring stirred into a cocoa buttermilk batter, frosted with a cooked flour frosting that was lighter and less sweet than cream cheese. That frosting required cooking butter, flour, and milk on a stove until thick, then beating it with sugar until it turned white and airy. It produced a texture that melted on the tongue instead of sitting on it. Whoever brought this cake knew it would be compared to every red velvet that came before. The cooked frosting did not survive the shortcut era. Cream cheese took its place, and the original flavor disappeared with the effort. Number 13, stewed hen and drop dumplings. Not a young chicken, a hen, an old laying hen past her productive years, tough enough to resist any short cooking method. Green Book cafes bought spent hens from local farms for next to nothing because nobody else wanted them. The hen simmered in water with salt, pepper, celery, and an onion split down the middle until the meat separated into long strings. Then the dumplings. Flour, baking powder, salt, and a splash of the broth dropped by the spoonful into the bubbling liquid. The lid stayed on. 10 minutes later, the dumplings puffed thick. The dish tasted like the patience it took to make. Stewed hen disappeared for the simplest reason in American food history. Factory farming made young broiler chickens so cheap that nobody bothered with a tough old hen anymore. The economics shifted. The flavor was the cost. It is tempting to call these dishes lost. They are not lost. Lost implies they were misplaced, that someone set them down and forgot where. What happened to Green Book cafe food was not forgetfulness. It was a series of economic decisions that made perfect sense one at a time and erased an entire food culture all at once. Desegregation opened every restaurant in the country. Factory farming dropped the price of chicken. Interstate highways bypassed the towns where the cafes stood. Supermarkets replaced the open-air markets where cooks bought produce before dawn. Refrigeration made canning unnecessary. Convenience made patience expensive. Every one of those changes was progress, and every one of them took a small cafe in a small town and made it a little less necessary until one morning the cook did not unlock the door because there was nobody left coming through it. Number 26, deviled crab. On the Carolina coast and the Gulf Shore, black speakeasies near the water served the deviled crab packed back into the shell and baked until the top browned. The filling was crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs, mustard, cayenne, and a splash of Worcestershire. It was finger food for a room full of people standing shoulder to shoulder with drinks in their hands. The shells went back to the kitchen and got refilled all night. When the coastal speakeasies closed after repeal, the deviled crab shells went with them. Legal seafood restaurants served crab cakes on a plate with a fork. Nobody brought back the shell. That small difference erased the entire tradition. Number 21, hot water cornbread. The hot water cornbread was the trick that separated grandmothers who could cook from those who only thought they could. Yellow cornmeal went into a wide bowl with a heavy shake of salt on top and boiling water poured straight from the tea kettle while a wooden spoon stirred fast. The dough firmed up into a thick paste hot enough to burn your hand if you rushed it. Patties were shaped between two wet palms and dropped into half an inch of hot bacon grease in a heavy skillet. 2 minutes aside, crisp golden outside, steamy and soft inside. No oven, no rising time, no buttermilk needed, no eggs to spare. A working mother in Mississippi could put a stack of 6 on a table in under 15 minutes, alongside greens and beans and whatever scrap of pork was bubbling in the pot. Black grandmothers in the Mississippi Delta swore the trick was the tea kettle, not the cornmeal. Hot water cornbread was speed cooking before anybody invented the term. Number 10, tea cakes. Before there was a Pillsbury cookie aisle, there were tea cakes, and through about 1968, every black grandmother in the rural South kept a pinch jar of nutmeg, vanilla, and lemon extract reserved for them. The church matrons creamed a cup of softened butter with 2 cups of white sugar, beat in 3 eggs and a glass of buttermilk, then stirred in flour, baking soda, and a heavy spoon of grated nutmeg until a soft dough formed. They chilled it on the back porch overnight, rolled it out 1/2 inch thick on a floured oilcloth, and cut it with the rim of a juice glass. Baked 12 minutes at 375 degrees on a heavy aluminum sheet, the tea cakes came out the color of pale gold, soft in the middle and crisp at the edge. Wrapped in wax paper, 4 dozen at a time made it to the fellowship hall. After packaged cookies cheapened in the 1980s, the homemade tea cake quietly went home for good. Number 11, blackberry cobbler from scratch. Not from a can, not from a bag in the freezer, from a bucket of blackberries picked that morning from a patch behind somebody's barn. The thorns drew blood, your fingers turned purple, and the cobbler that came out 2 hours later was worth every scratch. The filling was berries, sugar, and a squeeze of lemon. The topping was flour, butter, sugar, and buttermilk dropped on in spoonfuls so it baked into an uneven golden crust. A woman in Dawson, Georgia, made blackberry cobbler for the Watson family reunion every year from 1958 to 1982. She picked the berries herself at 5 in the morning before the heat set in. Her cobbler fed 30 people, and there was never a spoonful left. By the mid-1980s, the blackberry patches were gone. Fields were cleared. Herbicides killed the wild bushes along fence lines, and frozen berries produced a cobbler that tasted like a memory of a memory, close, but not quite right. Number 12, collards cooked Friday, served Saturday on the curb. The collards on the curb were never the freshly cooked collards. The freshly cooked collards were Sunday collards. The block party collards had to sit overnight because greens that had not been kissed by their own pot liquor for 12 hours were not collards yet. A neck bone went in Friday after work, a whole onion, a tablespoon of vinegar, a pinch of red pepper. The pot stayed on a low flame past midnight, like a slow conversation. Your grandmother took it off when she finally went to bed. Saturday morning, the greens went into the foil pan cold, and the pan got reheated on the curb in a chafing tray over a can of Sterno. The bitterness was gone. The pot liquor was a brown miracle. A piece of cornbread from a cast iron skillet got dipped into the liquor and eaten standing. By 1990, the chafing tray had been replaced by a microwave upstairs, and the collards no longer rested 12 hours because the elder who insisted on the rest had passed. Poke salad was one of the first wild greens to emerge each spring, and black families relied on it when store-bought vegetables were beyond reach. The young shoots were gathered from roadsides and fence lines where they grew freely. Preparation required care because the mature plant contained toxins needing multiple boilings to remove. Women blanched the greens twice before frying them in bacon grease with onions. The result was tender and earthy, served with cornbread to soak up the pot liquor. For children, gathering poke salad meant contributing while learning which plants were safe. For adults, it meant survival through knowledge passed from enslaved ancestors. Poke salad represented resilience, connecting families to the land through meals born from necessity.
Cabbage and noodle skillet dinners were a quiet kitchen staple, born from the pairing of affordable ingredients and a knack for stretching a meal. Egg noodles were boiled until just tender, while thinly sliced cabbage and onions were sautéed in butter until soft and slightly caramelized. The two were tossed together in the same pan, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and sometimes a hint of paprika or garlic. The noodles soaked up the buttery flavor from the cabbage and onions, making every bite rich yet comforting. This dish was easy to prepare in large batches, so it often appeared at community meals or after Sunday service, where its warm, homey aroma could draw people in from down the hall. It was especially popular during lean times because it required so few ingredients and could be served as either a side or a filling main dish. Even without meat, it was hearty enough to satisfy, proving that the simplest recipes could still taste like home.
Number 3, damson plum preserves. The small, dark plums grew on trees planted by grandparents and great-grandparents, sour enough to pucker the mouth when eaten raw, but perfect for preserving. Big Mama halved them, pulled the pits, and cooked them down with sugar until the fruit broke apart and the syrup turned a deep, almost purple black. Damson plum preserves had a tartness that no grape or blackberry jam could match, and the flavor was complex enough to stand up to a salty biscuit without being overwhelmed. The trees that produced the fruit were old and slow growing, and when they died, most families did not replant. The preserves lasted as long as the jars on the shelf held out, and when the last jar was opened and scraped clean, the recipe went with it. Number 7, smoked possum brought by the oldest man at the cookout. Trapped or hunted, cleaned, soaked in salt water overnight, rubbed with pepper and garlic, and smoked low over hickory for hours. The meat was dark, rich, and fatty, with a flavor that divided people hard. Some loved it, some would not touch it, but the man who brought it never asked permission and never explained himself. Possum was a food that carried a weight heavier than its taste. It belonged to a generation that ate what the land provided because the grocery store was either too far, too expensive, or not interested in serving them. Cooking possum was not poverty. It was self-sufficiency practiced by people who had been denied every other kind of sufficiency. The older folks at the cookout understood this without saying it. They ate the possum because they remembered a time when refusing free meat was a luxury nobody had. The dish left in stages. First, the young people stopped eating it, then they stopped pretending to respect it. Then the man who trapped and smoked it every summer passed away, and nobody in the family knew how to set a trap. The skill, the knowledge, and the taste disappeared together in one generation without a single written recipe to prove any of it happened. Number 15, buttermilk pie. Buttermilk pie was made from ingredients every kitchen already had: eggs, buttermilk, sugar, butter, flour, and vanilla. The filling was whisked in a bowl, poured into a single crust, and baked until the top turned golden and the center just barely stopped trembling. It tasted like vanilla custard with a tang underneath that kept it from tipping into pure sweetness. Buttermilk pie was a Depression-era invention that held its ground at cookout tables for decades because it cost almost nothing and fed a crowd from a single pie pan. Sliced thin, it stretched across 8 or 10 servings. The pie lost its place when grocery store bakeries made buying easier than baking, and a generation grew up never knowing the tang that separated this pie from every other one on the table. Number 19, salmon croquettes with white gravy. In every Green Book cafe from the Carolinas to East Texas, there was one dish that could be made on any day in any season with ingredients that never spoiled: salmon croquettes. Canned salmon mashed with egg, onion, cracker crumbs, and black pepper, shaped into flat patties and fried golden. The gravy was flour, butter, milk, and salt, nothing more. The plate came with 2 croquettes, a pool of white gravy, and a biscuit on the side. This was the dish that kept small cafes alive. A case of canned salmon from the grocery wholesaler lasted weeks on the shelf. The patties could be shaped in the morning and kept cold until ordered. Frying took 4 minutes. The gravy took 3. A cook working alone could put this plate on the counter faster than any other hot meal, and it always sold. In cafes where the daily menu changed with the groceries, the salmon croquette plate was the one constant. Salmon croquettes belonged to black cafes the way chop suey belonged to Chinese American restaurants, not because anyone invented the dish, but because the economics demanded it. Cheap protein, long shelf life, fast cook, and a flavor that travelers recognized from their own mother's kitchens. Comfort and efficiency on the same plate. After the cafes closed, salmon croquettes survived in home kitchens longer than almost anything else on this list. Grandmothers kept making them well into the 1990s, but canned salmon climbed from pennies to dollars a tin, and the next generation decided salmon should be grilled or baked. The croquette started to feel like something to apologize for. No single cook ever designed a more practical meal. The apology was the real waste. Number 15, scrapple. After an all-night session in the black speakeasies of Philadelphia and Baltimore, scrapple showed up at dawn. It was a loaf made from pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices, chilled until firm, then sliced and fried in a hot pan until the outside crisped and the inside stayed soft. The taste was savory, faintly herby, and unlike anything else on the plate. Philadelphia's 7th Ward, the center of black life in the city, had speakeasies that served sliced scrapple with eggs and coffee as the sun came up. It was recovery food for a community that worked hard and stayed out late. When Prohibition ended, the all-night establishments closed their doors, and the dawn breakfast that followed them stopped being served. Most histories of Prohibition end on December 5th, 1933. They should not. When repeal came, America celebrated, but for black communities, it solved nothing. The legal bars and restaurants that reopened did not welcome black patrons. In the South, Jim Crow kept every lunch counter segregated. In the North, the rules were unwritten but just as firm. The speakeasy had been the one place where a black cook could feed her community on her own terms. Repeal took that away without offering anything in return. The women who ran those kitchens did not get restaurant licenses. They did not get bank loans. They did not get storefronts on the main street. They went back to cooking in their own homes for their own families, and the dishes they had served to a packed room on a Saturday night became private meals for a table of 4. The food did not die. It went quiet. Number 12, oxtails over rice. Long before oxtails became a delicacy on a white tablecloth menu, the cut sat in the back of the meat case at the black-owned grocery store for under $2 a pound. Black grandmothers in Brooklyn and Newark knew exactly what to do with the bony segments most other shoppers passed over. The pieces were rinsed, patted dry, and seared brown in hot bacon grease, then dropped into a heavy pot with chopped onion, garlic, bay leaves, and water enough to cover by 2 inches. 4 hours of slow simmering pulled the gelatin out of the bone and turned the broth into something thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. A splash of browning sauce gave the gravy its mahogany color. Served over a mound of hot white rice with butter beans on the side, the meal stretched 2 pounds of bone into supper for 6. Oxtails were the cut the world had not yet learned to charge for. Number 28, ambrosia with sour cream. The 1960s church version had nothing to do with the airy whipped cream ambrosia that took over by the 1990s. The Sunday school teachers drained 2 cans of Dolly pineapple chunks, 1 jar of maraschino cherries, and a tin of mandarin oranges into a yellow Pyrex bowl. They folded in sweetened baker's coconut and a generous cup of Daisy sour cream, then chilled it overnight in an icebox. Some women added halved pecans from a backyard tree. It came to the fellowship hall in the same Pyrex it was made in, wrapped in a clean dish towel. Spooned next to ham, it cut the salt with something cold and tangy and faintly tropical. By 1978, the sour cream was gone, replaced by Cool Whip, and the old version was lost. Number 23, watermelon rind pickles. Your grandmother did not throw away the rind. She peeled off the green skin, cut the white flesh into cubes, and soaked them overnight in salt water. The next day, she boiled them in a syrup of sugar, vinegar, cinnamon sticks, and cloves until the cubes turned translucent and sweet. She packed them into mason jars and sealed them with paraffin wax. In the 1960s, jars of watermelon rind pickles showed up at every reunion table in the Deep South. A jar cost almost nothing to make because the rind was garbage to everyone else. By the 1990s, the canning tradition had faded. Younger women did not own pressure canners, and watermelon came pre-cut in plastic containers from the grocery store with no rind attached. The raw material vanished. The skill vanished with it. Number 21, your auntie's potato salad with mustard yellow. The recipe lived in one woman's head and changed by mood. Mustard, mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, hard-boiled egg, paprika on top, never raisins, never apple. The bowl was a Tupperware big enough to bathe a small dog in. She covered it with the same lid she had owned since 1969. She carried it down herself, set it on the table herself, lifted the lid herself, because if you opened her bowl and stuck a wrong spoon in, she would know. You would hear about it next Sunday. Children knew not to ask whose salad it was. The shape of the bowl told them. By 1990, the auntie had moved out to Yonkers. The niece took the recipe wrong, and the bowl sat empty on a high shelf in a kitchen no grandchild visited on Saturdays. Chitterlings carried the weight of history in every bite, transforming pig intestines into a dish defining celebration and survival. Cleaning them required hours of labor, scrubbing and rinsing until ready for the pot. Women simmered them with onions, vinegar, and red pepper until tender, the aroma filling homes for blocks. The smell announced something special was being prepared, usually for holidays or Sunday dinners. Black families understood chitterlings represented making treasure from what others discarded. The texture was chewy and rich, eaten with hot sauce and vinegar to cut through heaviness. Children either loved them or learned to, watching elders savor each piece. Preparing chitterlings was knowledge passed between generations, a skill that could not be learned from books. They were survival food elevated to sacred status.
Creamed kohlrabi was a mild, creamy side dish that turned this unusual vegetable into pure comfort food. Kohlrabi, with its pale green bulb and delicate flavor, was peeled, cubed, and boiled until just tender. The pieces were then simmered in a cream sauce made with butter, milk, and a touch of flour for thickening. The result was a dish that was soft, subtly sweet, and deeply satisfying, making it a perfect companion to roasted chicken or baked ham. Kohlrabi was a cool weather crop, so this dish often appeared in autumn and winter, providing a fresh vegetable option when gardens were otherwise bare. Creamed kohlrabi showed that even lesser-known produce could be transformed into a family favorite with the right preparation. It was a simple recipe, but one that carried the feeling of a home-cooked meal meant to warm both the stomach and the spirit. Molasses glazed ham combined the sweet, robust flavor of molasses with savory ham to create an economical yet indulgent dish common in mid-century Southern kitchens. This recipe made use of affordable ham cuts, often shoulder or picnic hams, which were slow-cooked and then brushed generously with a sticky molasses glaze. The glaze caramelized in the oven, infusing the meat with rich sweetness, balanced by a hint of saltiness. Molasses was a staple sweetener in African American households, valued for its deep flavor and affordability compared to refined sugar. The dish was a centerpiece at family gatherings and holiday meals, symbolizing both celebration and resourcefulness. Cooking ham with molasses allowed cooks to stretch ingredients while still producing a dish that felt special and satisfying. Though less common today, This recipe reflects a culinary heritage of making the most out of pantry staples while honoring flavor. Its lingering aroma and rich taste evoke memories of home kitchens filled with warmth and tradition.
Number 4, buttermilk pie. A custard pie with no fruit, no chocolate, no pecans. Just buttermilk, eggs, sugar, butter, vanilla, and a dusting of nutmeg poured into a single crust and baked until the filling set and the top turned freckled brown. It tasted tangy and sweet at the same time, and the texture was somewhere between flan and chess pie. Buttermilk pie came to the cookout wrapped in foil on the back seat of somebody's car. It was the dessert that cost almost nothing to make and fed the most people, and it was always the first one finished. It left the cookout table when the younger generation stopped baking from scratch, and the store-bought sheet cake took over the dessert end of the spread. Number 17, smoked bologna. Smoked bologna was a poor man's brisket in black communities across Mississippi, Alabama, and East Texas. A whole chub, unsliced, scored in a crosshatch on the outside, rubbed with yellow mustard and dry seasoning, and smoked over wood for 3 to 4 hours until the outside caramelized and the inside turned soft and faintly sweet from the smoke. It was sliced thick and eaten on white bread with mustard and pickles. A 5-pound chub fed a dozen people for almost nothing. Smoked bologna showed up at 4th of July gatherings well into the 1990s in the rural South and in great migration cities like Chicago, where Mississippi families carried the tradition north. It never made it onto a food magazine cover. That was part of its honesty. The price of soul food tells a story most food columns leave out. Turkey legs, smoked hocks, organ meats, the parts white customers walked past at the butcher counter. Black families turned them into dishes that required skill, patience, and generations of knowledge. Then the broader market caught on. What once cost pennies a pound now commands $5, $8, $10. The ingredients that built the 4th of July plate became specialty items priced beyond the reach of the people who created them. The cookout did not shrink because families stopped wanting to cook. It shrank because the grocery bill started costing more than the fireworks. Number 22, rice and tomato gravy. A bowl of white rice under a ladle of gravy made from canned tomatoes, rendered fat, flour, salt, and black pepper. That was lunch at dozens of Green Book cafes across South Carolina and Georgia. Some cooks added a slice of onion or a splash of Worcestershire. Most did not. The gravy was thin, almost a soup, and it stained the rice pink. Families called it tomato gravy or red gravy, depending on the county they came from. No restaurant today puts rice and tomato gravy on the menu. It is too simple, too poor, too honest about where it came from. The market decided it was not worth selling. Number 10, pan-fried pork tenderloin. A pork tenderloin pounded flat, breaded in seasoned flour, and fried in a cast iron skillet until golden brown sent a smell through the walls that reached the street. In the speakeasies of Indianapolis, Kansas City, and Chicago's South Side, the pan-fried tenderloin was the expensive plate. It cost more than the gizzards and the beans because the cut was better, and it announced that this was not a soup kitchen. This was a place where people came to be treated well. The tenderloin hung off the edges of the plate because nobody trimmed it to fit. A pile of white bread and a scoop of coleslaw sat next to it, and the whole thing cost a fraction of what a legal restaurant would have charged for the same meal. The smell was the problem. Police on the beat in black neighborhoods during Prohibition knew that the scent of frying pork behind a closed door meant an unlicensed kitchen, which meant unlicensed liquor. Raids on black speakeasies often started with the smell, not a tip. After repeal, The tenderloin sandwich moved into Midwestern diners, breaded and institutional. But the speakeasy version, pounded by hand and fried behind a locked door, the version that could get a whole room arrested, did not survive. Number 3, meatloaf. Number 3 on this list was the supper every grandmother stretched into Monday's lunchbox by Sunday night. 1 pound of ground chuck mixed in a wide bowl with a sleeve of crushed saltine crackers, a beaten egg, half a yellow onion chopped fine, a long squeeze of ketchup, a shake of Worcestershire, and salt and pepper. The mix patted into a loaf pan, topped with a thick streak of ketchup, baked at 350 for an hour until the top turned glossy and the edges pulled away from the pan. Sunday's hot supper, sliced into thick pink rectangles, served over mashed potatoes with brown gravy. Monday morning, 2 cold slices went between bread with mustard and wax paper into a metal lunch pail. Black grandmothers in Cleveland and Indianapolis bought the chuck on Saturday and built the whole week around that single loaf. Meatloaf was the dish that fed Sunday and Monday from the same pan. Number 11, sweet milk custard. Through about 1967, a wide white enamel pan of soft-baked custard cooled on the back counter of our church kitchens on the first Sunday of the month. The church mothers scalded a quart of whole milk in a saucepan, beat 6 eggs with a cup of white sugar and a tablespoon of vanilla, then strained the custard through a fine sieve into a buttered Pyrex baking dish. They set the dish in a larger pan of hot water and baked it slow at 325 degrees for almost an hour until the top turned freckled gold and the center barely trembled. A grating of fresh nutmeg went over the top the moment it came out. Spooned into footed glass cups for the older saints first, it tasted of sweet milk and church kitchens. By 1985, the box pudding mix had taken over. Number 8, sweet potato pone. This was not sweet potato pie. Pie was for Thanksgiving. Pone was for the reunion. You grated raw sweet potatoes by hand on a box grater until your knuckles bled and your arms burned. Then you mixed the pulp with sugar, butter, eggs, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of cane syrup. You poured it into a cast iron skillet and baked it for nearly 2 hours at low heat until the top formed a dark, caramelized crust and the inside was dense and sweet and somewhere between a custard and a cake. A woman in Eatonton, Georgia, made sweet potato pone for 50 years. She grated the potatoes the morning of the reunion and had the scars on her knuckles to prove it. Her pone served 20 people from a single skillet. By the 1990s, nobody wanted to grate sweet potatoes by hand. Food processors didn't give the same texture. The pone needed the rough, uneven shreds that only a box grater could produce. The labor was the ingredient. Number 6, the pig feet jar at the elders' table. Pickled pig feet sat in a tall glass jar on a side table reserved for the elders. The brine was vinegar, salt, hot pepper flakes, garlic, a bay leaf. The feet had been pickled the previous Sunday. The jar passed elder to elder. A long fork came out, speared a foot. The foot landed on a paper plate. Your great uncle ate it with a paper napkin, and the next elder waited his turn. Children were not invited to that table. They watched from the curb. They did not understand what was happening. The pickled foot was not a snack. It was a marker of who had survived enough Saturdays to deserve a foot. The thing is, the jar was a kind of roll call. By 1990, the elders were gone, the jar was empty, and pickled pig feet had moved into a corner of the bodega next to the pickled eggs. Alone, untouched, waiting for a customer who had also disappeared. Fried green tomatoes appeared when gardens produced more than families could eat before frost arrived. The unripe tomatoes were sliced thick, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and fried until the coating turned golden and crisp. Inside, the tomato remained firm and tangy, contrasting the crunchy exterior. Black families served them as side dishes or stacked between bread for sandwiches. The dish prevented waste, ensuring no tomato went unused even if it never ripened. Children helped pick the green tomatoes, learning which were firm enough for frying. The tangy flavor balanced rich meats and greens on the plate. Fried green tomatoes were summer preserved in every bite, making gardens stretch into late season meals. They proved timing and technique could transform even unripe produce into something memorable.
Rabbit was one of the few meats you did not have to buy. You trapped it, you skinned it, you cooked it over a low flame and gave thanks for every bite. Stewed rabbit with wild onions was a meal of real effort. Catching the meat was half the battle, but cleaning it was even harder. Once in the pot, the meat softened slowly, and the onions, dug from fields or creek beds, gave it a sweet, peppery edge. Sometimes folks added vinegar or dried apples just to stretch the flavor. You could serve it over biscuits or eat it straight from the pot. This was food for people who made do with what they had and did not ask for more. It was quiet, filling, and honest. A dish that reminded you that hunger does not care about preferences. You ate to keep going. You ate because something had to.
Number 3, candy yams made in a foil pan on the side burner. Sweet potatoes peeled, sliced thick, layered in a disposable aluminum pan with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, and a pour of vanilla. The pan sat on the side burner or on the cooler edge of the grill, covered in foil, and cooked low until the slices softened and the sugar melted into a dark syrup that thickened as it cooled. The yams were the dish that bridged the cookout and the Sunday table. They belonged at both, and the woman who made them never used a recipe. She poured the sugar until it looked right, added butter until it smelled right, and checked the pan by tilting it to see how the syrup moved. Candied yams left the cookout when the cook had moved indoors, and the side burner disappeared. The dish survived on the holiday table, but the outdoor version, made in a throwaway pan with smoke drifting into the foil, had a flavor the oven could not replicate. Number 11, succotash. Succotash was corn and lima beans cooked together in a heavy pot with butter, salt, pepper, and sometimes a strip of bacon for depth. The corn was cut fresh from the cob. The limas were shelled by hand from pods that grew fat and heavy in the July heat. The two vegetables cooked together until the starches merged and the liquid thickened into a glaze that coated the back of the spoon. Succotash was an indigenous dish adopted and adapted by Black families across the South from Virginia down to East Texas. It was plain food that required no recipe and no instruction beyond watching somebody else make it once. When fresh limas became hard to find outside of farmers markets and frozen corn replaced the ears from the garden, the dish lost the sweetness and the texture that made it worth standing over a hot pot. Number 9, fried rabbit. Before factory chicken, rabbit cost less than any other meat a Southern family could put on the table. A man with a rifle and an hour of daylight before supper could feed the house. Green Book cafes in rural Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas served fried rabbit the same way they served fried chicken, soaked in buttermilk, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in a deep skillet. The meat was leaner, darker, and gamier than chicken. The bones were smaller and sharper. A fried rabbit plate came with 2 pieces, a biscuit, and a side of greens. By the late 1960s, supermarket chicken had gotten so cheap that rabbit lost its place on the menu. The last generation of cafe cooks who knew how to break down a whole rabbit retired without passing that knowledge forward. The skill left with them. Number 14, black-eyed pea cakes. Yesterday's pot of black-eyed peas, mashed with a fork, mixed with an egg and enough cornmeal to hold it together, shaped into patties and fried in a hot skillet. That was the whole recipe, and in the juke joints and speakeasies of the rural South, it turned leftover beans into bar food. The cakes came out crisp on the outside and creamy in the center, with a mineral, earthy taste that went well with whiskey. They were cheap, fast, and easy to eat standing up. After Prohibition ended, the juke joints that kept their doors open stopped frying bean cakes. The menu shrank to whatever could be served without a cook. The pea cake went out the door with the cook who fried it. Number 4, baked macaroni and cheese. Sunday dinner in our households across the south side of Chicago and the east side of Detroit was not complete without a deep pan of baked macaroni and cheese sitting next to the smothered chicken. The cheap elbow macaroni boiled in salted water for 8 minutes, drained, dumped into a buttered baking dish. The cheese sauce came together in a second pot, a roux of butter and flour, a slow pour of evaporated milk whisked smooth, a beaten egg stirred in off the heat, then 2 cups of sharp cheddar grated by hand and melted into the cream. The sauce poured over the noodles, more cheese sprinkled across the top, a heavy shake of paprika for color. 35 minutes in a hot oven turned the top into a golden crust that cracked under the serving spoon. The whole pan cost under $3.50 and fed 8. Mac and cheese was the Sunday side that earned more praise than the meat. Number 19, Sunday spaghetti red pan. Here's the choir feeder from the intro. In 1963, for under $2 in groceries, the women's auxiliary at most black churches in Memphis, Birmingham, and St. Louis could fill a whole choir of 40 voices off a single rectangular pan of Sunday spaghetti red. A box of Mueller's spaghetti, a can of Hunt's tomato sauce, 1 yellow onion, a half pound of cheap ground chuck, garlic powder, sugar, and a dusting of sharp cheddar across the top. The whole pan baked, covered in tin foil at 350 degrees while the sermon ran long. Pulled from the oven at the closing hymn, it served 40 paper plates with leftovers for the deacons. By the late 1970s, ground beef prices climbed and the dish migrated home. Number 25, chitlin pie. This was the dish that separated the generations. The old folks lined up for it. The children ran. A woman in Macon, Georgia, made one every July reunion from 1954 until 1982. She cleaned the chitlins herself, boiled them with onion and bay leaf until tender, then folded them into a pie crust with gravy, black pepper, and a pinch of sage. The crust was lard-based, rolled thin, crimped by hand. She served it from a cast iron skillet. In the 1960s, a slice cost nothing because the intestines were nearly free. Butchers sold them by the bucket for less than $1. By 1985, the younger generation did not want to clean them. The smell alone took 4 hours of soaking and scrubbing to remove, and without someone willing to do that work, the pie disappeared from the table. It was not squeamishness, it was time. Fatback and greens sustained black families through the 1920s, providing nutrients and calories in one pot. Fatback was cured with salt and stored for months without refrigeration. Sliced and simmered with collards or mustard greens, it rendered fat slowly while infusing vegetables with smoky richness. The greens were inexpensive or free, gathered from gardens or foraged wild. Together they formed a complete meal with cornbread. The fat provided calories needed by families performing hard labor, while greens delivered vitamins, preventing deficiency, diseases. Mothers knew a pot could stretch across days, reheated until every drop was gone. Children grew up with this dish as constant presence, its smell signaling comfort. Fatback and greens was assurance the family would not go hungry.
Pickled pearl onions were small but mighty in flavor, bringing a bright, tangy bite to a plate heavy with savory dishes. These tiny onions were peeled and soaked in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and spices until they absorbed the perfect balance of sweet and sour. Often stored in glass jars, they could be kept for months, ready to serve alongside roast meats, beans, or greens. Their size made them easy to pop whole into the mouth, releasing a burst of flavor that cut through the richness of other foods. They were common on holiday relish trays, offering both color and contrast to creamy or smoky dishes. Because they were made in batches, they were a thrifty way to preserve onions from the garden or market before they spoiled. Pickled pearl onions were proof that the smallest things on the table could leave a lasting impression, adding brightness to even the heaviest meal. You might wrinkle your nose, but fried rattlesnake was a real meal on the frontier. If you were living off the land, you ate what the land gave you, and sometimes that meant a coiled-up surprise near your boots. Rattlesnake meat was surprisingly tender and mild, almost like chicken, and once you peeled the skin and cleaned the bones, it fried up fast. Cornmeal crust gave it crunch, and a sprinkle of pepper or dried herbs gave it flavor. Folks who lived near the desert or in rocky canyons got used to seeing these snakes. Some made it a sport to hunt them, others just got desperate enough to try. Either way, you dipped the meat in egg, rolled it in cornmeal, and dropped it in hot fat. It sizzled, popped, and came out golden. Eaten with dandelion greens or roasted roots, it was more than just edible. It was a story. One you told around a fire long after the danger was gone.
Number 16, chitlin plates. The chitlins had been cleaned for days before the cookout, soaked, scraped, boiled, and boiled again. The smell carried down the block and announced exactly what kind of gathering this was going to be. Served with hot sauce and white bread, sometimes fried crispy after the boiling. Chitlins at the cookout were a line in the sand between the generation that cleaned them without complaint and the generation that wanted no part of it. They were gone from most cookout tables by the mid-1990s, pushed out by the sheer labor they demanded and the embarrassment the younger crowd attached to serving them where neighbors could see. Number 30, corn pudding. Fresh corn cut straight off the cob was stirred into a batter of eggs, butter, sugar, and milk, poured into a baking dish, and baked until the top browned and the center set like custard. It was not quite a vegetable and not quite a dessert. The texture sat between the two, and nobody tried to classify it. Corn pudding held its place on 4th of July tables from the 1940s through the 1980s across the rural South, where July meant the corn was at its peak, and the women who made it knew by feel how much sugar the batch needed without measuring a single thing. Fresh sweet corn from the garden was what made the dish. The canned version that replaced it turned corn pudding into something flat and not worth heating up the oven. Number 11, buttermilk biscuits with sorghum syrup. Sorghum was the sweetener of the Black South long before refined sugar became affordable. In the rent parties of Harlem and the juke joints of Tennessee, hot buttermilk biscuits split open and drizzled with dark sorghum syrup were a late-night offering. The biscuits were baked in a pan and served warm, and the sorghum gave them a deep, almost bitter sweetness that refined sugar could never match. It was comfort food disguised as a snack. After 1933, sorghum production declined as cheap white sugar took over. The biscuit and sorghum combination faded from public tables and into the memories of families who still kept a jug in the pantry. The smoke cleared, the paper plates went in the trash, and the yard was quiet by dark. But every dish on that table carried a name, a family, and a neighborhood. Try making watermelon rind pickles this weekend, or pull out a cast iron skillet and fry some corn the old way. If your family had a cookout dish that did not make this list, drop it in the comments. Name the dish, name the person who made it, and tell us what city. Share this video with someone who still knows what a real cookout smelled like.